This infant was abandoned and sold into slavery due to a disability. A severed nerve left him with a permanent smile. A slave trader purchased him after seeing his father's massive physique, unable to believe such a powerful man would heartlessly sell his own son. Driven by the ambition to create the ultimate slave, he cast the boy into the arena and instructed the reigning champion to raise him well. The champion looked at the child with confusion, believing this was no place for a toddler and that he wouldn't last a week. However, the boy survived, possessing a hearty appetite and a restless spirit, eventually growing up in that blood-soaked arena to become its most formidable existence. One day, while bandaging himself, he overheard a conversation from above involving two men who had come to place bets. A curly-haired man had brought his younger schoolmate along. The senior gambled recklessly on odds and evens, believing that as long as one still draws breath, there is a chance to recover losses. The younger man disagreed, knowing that one cannot expect a harvest without sowing seeds. Suddenly, the younger man realized the senior had swiped his meager tuition money. He panicked, but the scoundrel had already tossed the pouch onto the betting table. That money represented his parents' grueling labor and the trust of his little sister. His fists clenched as he cursed his decision to accompany such a wretched senior. Meanwhile, a prisoner from the north stepped into the arena. This giant had slaughtered countless souls and carried a massive spiked mace. The stadium erupted in excitement, yet this was not the fighter the two had wagered on. The curly-haired man announced they were betting on Happy Face. Hearing the name, the junior felt skeptical, thinking it sounded incredibly weak and pathetic. Looking down at the stage, he grew even more discouraged, feeling this was a death match rather than a circus. William was stunned to see the warrior lacked any equipment from head to toe, and he screamed that the boy didn't even look like a gladiator. He noted the boy's vacant eyes and lack of weapons, which seemed like a death sentence. The spectators looked at William with disdain, while the bald fighter felt insulted and grew furious. He braced himself and gripped his iron mace, preparing to charge. With a powerful swing, he sent his opponent tumbling across the ground, though the boy's trembling body struggled to stand back up. Terrified, William shouted for him to run and find a weapon unless he intended to die there. Part of his concern likely stemmed from the fate of his tuition money. The bald man charged again, boasting that he would grant the boy a peaceful end. Despite the peril, Happy Face continued to smile, leaving William wondering if the attack had actually been blocked. Happy nimbly evaded the strike before spinning 180 degrees in midair to land a blow on the bald man's face. As the crowd cheered, Happy Face followed up with a move that immediately knocked his opponent out. A relentless barrage of attacks followed, leaving the man standing helpless like a punching bag. It was a display of absolute dominance, and when Happy Face was declared the winner, William stood frozen in disbelief. The manager approached to give William his winnings, but he was baffled to receive only a single coin. It turned out the curly-haired senior was playing a prank on him. Happy's matches were merely for entertainment, given his 99.99% win rate. The senior eventually returned the original tuition money. He didn't miss the chance to mock the junior for being a coward. The subsequent matches were just as brutal and savage as William had anticipated. He left shortly after, returning to the academy to pay his fees and study as usual. However, when he tried to sleep, his mind was flooded with images of the smiling gladiator. The image haunted his dreams until he bolted awake at dawn. Looking completely drained, he approached his senior, startling the curly-haired man. William suggested they return to the arena that day. The next morning, as the sun rose and a rooster crowed, Deathbringer jerked awake with his eyes wide open. He clutched his chest in pain and sat up slowly. Behind him, another prisoner spoke while eating, noting that he had slept well after fainting and suggesting he warm up. Deathbringer glanced toward the noise and saw Happy Face nearby, diligently punching a straw target. As Deathbringer prepared to speak, a large man interrupted, telling him he was lucky to have been matched against that boy. He explained that the boy adjusts his strength to match his opponent, winning without killing to keep the audience satisfied. Deathbringer scoffed at the idea of such adjustments. He argued that he had only been careless and that a single kick had landed by luck. The large man challenged him, stating that if the boy had been serious, Deathbringer would be dead. Deathbringer snorted in anger as the other man pointed toward a pile of corpses being dragged away and tossed into a container. He told him he would have ended up in that bin otherwise. Deathbringer trembled with rage, but the man refused to stop. He continued to insist he was only speaking the truth until Happy Face finally spoke up with a laugh, telling them to take their fight to the arena. That man immediately knelt and said, "Yes," while Deathbringer stood by in shock, looking back to see the other prisoners averting their eyes in silence. Seeing this, he began to boast prematurely, wondering if that brat was really the leader here or just some wet-behind-the-ears kid. As Deathbringer started talking big again. "Are you all trembling because that kid beat me? Yeah, that must be it. But his victory in that match was nothing more than pure luck. He scanned the prisoners and judged them silently, thinking they were all just children, and that this world would be his if he could just kill that boy. I will rule this place, he thought, until a deep voice suddenly shattered the silence, calling out, "Hey, kid," as Happy turned and watched the man slowly approach him. The massive man scrutinized him with a piercing gaze, questioning him as he walked about how he ended up in this hellhole, whether as a slave or a prisoner of war. "Was it debt or were you snatched by pirates?" the man asked, but Happy replied calmly with a constant smile. "My father sold me here the moment I was born. At least that's what I was told," Happy added, leaving Deathbringer to exclaim in shock. "What? You mean you grew up right inside this iron cage?" Happy nodded and confirmed that the people here had raised him and taught him to fight, making Deathbringer frown and wonder why they feared him if they were stronger. Suddenly, Happy let out a giggle as if he had misspoken, and then, as if remembering something, he quickly corrected himself. "Ah, my mistake," he said, and in an instant, Happy stripped off his shirt to reveal a toned body covered in a web of old and new scars. Yet an infuriatingly innocent smile remained on his face as Happy spoke slowly, telling him that everyone who used to be here was now dead. At that moment, a flicker of confusion crossed Deathbringer's eyes as Happy continued in a flat tone, saying no one was left strong enough to teach him or face him in a duel. "It's always just a bunch of rookies," he said, reaching out his hand and causing Deathbringer to immediately recoil in a defensive instinct. But Happy only lightly touched his shoulder and whispered, "Just like you," before scratching his head thoughtfully and admitting he let himself get hurt to test the newcomers. "That's the only way to keep the audience and my opponents excited," he explained, words that hit Deathbringer like a heavy blow and left him utterly shell-shocked. Images of their recent match flashed through his mind, recalling how Happy had simply smiled and winked while holding the thorns as he swung his club, realizing it was all intentional. Happy had allowed himself to be hit on purpose rather than Deathbringer being strong, and a wave of sheer terror suddenly gripped the man as he questioned if he was being mocked. Happy placed a hand on his shoulder with an enigmatic smile and told him there was no need to fight during their break. "After all, we're both going to die in the arena eventually," he said, causing Deathbringer's fear to peak as tears welled up and he began to stammer. "Hey," Happy suddenly threw a punch, but he struck a nearby straw dummy with immense force, causing it to instantly shatter into pieces. Deathbringer lost all composure and collapsed in fear, while the large man muttered softly that everyone reacted that way at the beginning. Meanwhile, William held an arena entry card in his hand, but he noticed it bore a strange name, Tickstein. He wondered if it was a pseudonym, as the card belonged to the friend who had invited him, and then excitedly explained he couldn't make it because of a party. "Take my card and place some bets for me since the wagers can be recorded here," the friend instructed. But William took the card with only one thought in mind. He simply wanted to watch another one of Happy's matches rather than gamble. So he joined the queue and blended into the crowd entering the arena. Elsewhere at the gravedigger's house, an old man stood with a hunched back and a shovel slung over his shoulder. He called out, "Saga, follow me to the Lucaston arena to collect the bodies." And Saga replied without a moment's delay, "Yes, master." A short while later, the two arrived at the arena, and upon seeing the piles of corpses, the old man remarked that there must have been a massive battle yesterday. Wondering if one cart would be enough, the old man was reassured by Saga that he would stack them neatly, leading the man to feel he had hired the right person, as Saga began carefully loading the bodies and inspecting the hand of one corpse more closely. He then turned in another direction to examine the wounds on a different corpse, and then another, until Saga suddenly noticed something unusual and realized that most of the bodies bore remarkably similar injuries. Their size, location, and shape suggested they were inflicted by bare hands, yet he noted they were all old wounds rather than injuries sustained in their final matches. Suspicion began to take hold of Saga, as he wondered why there were so many bare-handed injuries on every single corpse when this arena permitted the use of weapons. While lost in thought, Saga was startled by the old man's panicked cry for him to come over, prompting him to approach and ask what was wrong. With a voice full of anxiety, the old man pointed out that the corpse appeared to be royalty and matched a missing person flyer, noting that while the hair and eyebrows were plucked, the mole and teeth were a perfect match. The old man then began to curse furiously, enraged that a member of the royal family who vanished a month ago had ended up as a corpse in this arena before handing over the flyer. Saga remained pensive for a moment before turning with a determined gaze to declare he would notify the Lord and the church immediately. But the old man quickly held him back. He warned Saga that doing so would put them in danger, explaining that the king would likely accuse them of plucking the hair to sell royal body parts regardless of any explanation they offered. The old man suggested it was best to bury the matter, but Saga stared him down with unwavering resolve and insisted that the guilty must be punished, vowing to protect justice even at the cost of his life. As Saga walked away, the old man stood dazed and realized he had hired the wrong person, while Saga firmly added that everyone involved with the arena would be executed. Meanwhile, William watched the arena intently and told himself he would stay for just one more match. The bright sun was suddenly obscured by dark clouds as the weather shifted violently, and a bolt of lightning tore across the sky just before the rain began to fall. A young woman from a noble family stood inside her home and watched the scene unfolding outside as the first droplets hit the ground. Seeing the downpour, the girl rushed to open the door and complained about the sudden change in weather as she hurried to gather the laundry. As the rain intensified, she stepped out and was met with a sight that left her utterly bewildered. A troop of heavily armored soldiers carrying gleaming spears stood before her house, making her wonder what was happening. The soldiers marched in a disciplined line, led by a gray-haired man with piercing emerald eyes. The young girl watched closely, questioning why the royal knights were there as the procession approached an ancient castle. Suddenly, the leader slammed his staff into the ground with such force that it sank into the soft earth. His face contorted with rage as he spoke in a booming voice. His commanding voice echoed as he announced that a royal assassin was hiding in the area before he issued orders to his soldiers. He commanded them to drag out every single rat and to execute anyone who dared to resist, prompting the soldiers to shout their obedience in unison. Back inside the arena, the atmosphere was electric as various matches continued to take place on the floor. William dismissed the fights as nonsense except for Happy's, just as a whistle blew to signal the end of a match and the loser was dragged away. The announcer stepped forward with a boisterous voice, clenching his fist and bowing solemnly to announce that the main event had finally begun. He asked the audience if they remembered the serial killer who terrified the city a month ago, sparking a wave of anxious whispers and speculation among the crowd. He identified the man as the Night Wraith, a killer who had slaughtered both patrols and guards, a name well known to everyone present. Though he was supposed to be awaiting execution on death row, the announcer revealed that the killer had been brought here for his debut match. He gestured toward the entrance and announced that the man would be facing Happy Faye, who stepped out with her usual innocent smile. William focused his attention entirely on Happy Faye as the announcer boomed with excitement, calling for the Night Wraith to emerge. From the opposing tunnel, a brown-haired man stepped into view, wearing a chilling and sinister grin. He was known as the Night Wraith, a creature with a grotesque face, high cheekbones, and piercing eyes. In this place, one only needed to kill to be granted food and shelter. "I never expected to find myself in heaven instead of hell," the Night Wraith remarked, licking his lips in a revolting manner before heading down to the arena. Suddenly, a figure appeared silently behind the Night Wraith, and that person was none other than the commander of the Royal Knights. He stepped forward slowly with a sharp blade in hand and spoke in a cold voice. "You piece of trash who should have died on the scaffold, how did you end up here?" The Night Wraith turned around with a look of utter confusion upon seeing the commander, whose expression became stern and eyes grew thoughtful. It appeared that Lucas had taken control of all the prisoners, a matter surely linked to the Empire. The Night Wraith suddenly turned to look behind the commander. His eyes widened as he realized something. He saw the wooden door behind was wide open and glanced down at the sharp knife in his hand. An idea flashed through his mind that they had even provided him with a weapon, and he immediately acted, wondering if he could actually escape. The Night Wraith pointed his blade at the commander, his face contorting like a demon's, but the commander did not hesitate for a moment. Gripping his sword firmly, he swung it decisively, sending the Night Wraith's upper torso flying into the air before the eyes of those in the stands. The match host grew anxious when the Night Wraith failed to appear, wondering why he was late as the audience began to murmur in dissatisfaction. "Is this a joke? There's no way that killer is here," someone shouted, but suddenly a scream erupted as William heard the commotion and looked over. The person who emerged was not the Night Wraith, but the commander of the Royal Knights, causing the stands to erupt in confusion over his presence. It seemed absurd that he would be an arena fighter, but the commander's booming voice immediately silenced the entire crowd. With a gaze that seemed to pierce through everyone's soul, he commanded in a steady voice for everyone to get down on their knees. "From this moment on, everyone here is a suspect in the assassination of the royal family," he declared, as soldiers appeared from all sides, leaving William bewildered. A man suddenly screamed his innocence and tried to push past, while a panicked William watched in terror as a blade flashed by like lightning. The blade stopped right behind the resisting man, whose face turned deathly pale as the soldier withdrew his weapon and spoke coldly. "This is the king's order. Execute all who resist. Everyone kneel," the soldier said, and a trembling William obeyed while the host also knelt as the commander barked his command. He was addressing Happy Fei, who remained unafraid and kept his bright smile, provoking the commander to ask irritably if he was being looked down upon. However, Happy Fei's gaze was fixed solely on the sharp blade in the commander's hand, which was still stained with the night wraith's blood. His eyes gleamed like a predator's as he suddenly lunged at the commander without a word, though the commander remained completely unfazed. Glancing down, he remarked on how everyone loved to resist before tightening his grip on his sword, just as Happy Fei's legs tensed and cracked the ground. The commander's blade swept past the boy's face, leaving the commander astonished that his weapon had nearly made contact with his head. He wondered why he had stopped before even drawing his sword fully, but then Happy Fei crouched low and leaped into the air like a starving tiger. Still wearing that eerie smile, Happy Fei's unexpected move caused the commander to show fear for the first time as the boy lunged to grab him. He slammed his head into the commander's, shocking the soldiers and spectators alike, before playfully flipping behind the man while maintaining his grin. Landing softly on his feet, he enraged the commander, who cursed at him and gripped his sword with even greater strength and speed. The commander raised his blade high and turned around in a rage, only for his eyes to narrow as if he had witnessed something terrifying. Happy Fei stood motionless a short distance away, just as he had before, causing the commander's blade to halt midair as he realized it was too late to dodge. The commander's eyes bulged as if they might pop out, and Happy Fei saw his chance to deliver a perfect strike, seizing the moment while the man hesitated. Without a moment's delay, Happy Fei unleashed a powerful punch directly into his opponent's face, his expression resembling that of a cold-blooded killer. Relishing his twisted game, he struck with such force that even the gargantuan commander was sent flying, his jaw hanging open in shock. Wei Lion witnessed the entire scene in disbelief, yet the commander was not one to yield so easily. He scrambled to his feet with a gaze fierce enough to devour a man, while Wei Lion watched Happy Fei with concern, wondering if the blow had landed as the commander gripped his blade with a confident smirk. He lunged forward with a sharp, decisive slash, but as the dust settled, Happy Fei had already vanished from sight. Suddenly, Happy Fei reappeared and swept the commander's legs, sending him crashing face first into the dirt, though he still struggled to look up. Happy Fei maintained his grin, radiating a dark aura with a predatory gaze, just as a volley of arrows came flying at him from behind. He caught nearly all of them, but a single arrow pierced his back, sending him to the ground as the commander slowly pulled himself up. Cursing under his breath, the commander wiped blood from his nose while the soldiers above called out in concern, his mind clouded with growing suspicion. Trembling with sweat and confusion over the stranger's identity, the commander was horrified to see Happy Fei lying there with an arrow through his throat, yet still grinning with delight. His sword arm shook as if facing a living demon. Clutching his wound, he realized the man was looking at him with pure contempt, refusing to submit even in the face of death. Wondering if the man would ever yield, he stood up and approached Happy Fei with his blade, vowing to grant his wish by taking his head. Suddenly, a loud-mouthed man adorned with many rings appeared and screamed for him to stop, prompting the commander to watch him rush forward. The blade lowered as Lu Ka-si arrived panting, explaining that the creature only attacked because it mistook this for an arena match, having never seen the outside world. Pointing forward with an agitated voice, Lu Ka-si claimed the boy couldn't comprehend the situation, viewing anyone in gear as a mere dueling opponent like a trained hound. The commander frowned and glanced at Happy Fei's eerie grin, while Lu Ka-si quickly explained that the expression was merely a result of a childhood deformity. His facial nerves were destroyed, leaving his muscles permanently frozen. Though the commander found it absurd, a sweating Lu Ka-si insisted it was the absolute truth. He recounted how Happy Fei had always been this way, leading everyone to believe he was perpetually joyful because he had smiled since he was a young boy. Whether he was being abandoned by his parents, searching for them, or suffering from injuries, he maintained that cheerful grin even as his caretaker lay dying. He always appeared delighted despite being bullied, branded a demon, and suffering in prison, surviving only through his sheer prowess in combat. Lu Ka-si concluded that while he couldn't express it, the boy felt constant terror and despair. Meanwhile, the scene shifted back to the present moment. As Lu Ka-si's monotonous voice echoed, he noted that people still refused to believe him, his gaze eventually settling on Happy Fei's countenance. Despite the agony, that face remained brimming with joy. Happy Fei continued to smile even as his face turned crimson from the struggle to breathe. Wei Lion heard every word of Lu Ka-si's explanation, noting how the world's fascination with the boy's appearance only fueled the man's growing malice. He confessed that he too was captivated and stayed for Happy Fei, claiming this was the ultimate compensation for a lifetime devoid of joy. While Happy Face stared intently at the blade's edge, the commander raised his weapon and approached the lunatic Lu Kasi, muttering that these beasts were just walking corpses anyway. Suddenly, the commander struck Lu Kasi across the face with the flat of his blade, leading to the man's confession and subsequent hanging alongside the arena's operators. From his high vantage point, the king gazed down at the corpses of the four criminals, his eyes fixed intently on the executed offenders. As his royal fury began to subside, the prisoners awaiting execution in the dungeons started to wail, crying out that they didn't want to die there. Some prisoners were weeping over their confinement, while William sat in the cell, his body trembling as he hugged himself and struggled to stay calm amidst the constant wailing. Word had spread that everyone involved was dead and that their turn was next, leaving William utterly consumed by terror. Negative thoughts began to cloud his mind as he wondered how things had come to this, questioning what he had done wrong to deserve the death penalty. William clutched his head and mumbled for mercy while Happy Face sat across from him, cheerfully asking if he was doing all right. William slowly looked up at Happy Face and, recognizing him, stood up in shock to ask when he had arrived. Happy Face smiled and replied that they had been locked up together since yesterday, explaining that he hadn't spoken because William had been muttering to himself. William calmed down and realized he had been completely out of it, but he suddenly recalled Happy Face's actions in battle and was instantly struck by fear. William asked if Happy Face was the one who was actually okay, questioning if he hadn't been struck by arrows. Happy Face recounted that he had been hit a few times, but simply pretended to be dead with the arrows still in him. And as he smiled innocently, William couldn't believe his ears, recalling Lu Cheng's words. His facial nerves were completely destroyed, and his muscles were frozen, meaning he couldn't express emotions despite being constantly paralyzed by fear, prompting William to sit down and continue his questioning. William sat back down and asked if he was currently afraid, to which Happy Face replied with a squinting smile that he was, since they were about to die. William looked down in thought, finding it absurd that the man's expressions and actions were so mismatched, when Happy Face suddenly asked if it was funny. Startled, William quickly tried to explain that he didn't mean it that way, but Happy Face interrupted him before he could finish his sentence. Happy Face said it was fine since everyone reacted that way, leaving William to stare in silence as he reflected on how different they were. One was smiling while the other was deep in thought, and though they were both awaiting death, William found himself feeling less tense in the other man's presence. Suddenly, the soldiers announced that prisoners with eligible families could call upon their relatives to prove their innocence by the king's decree. This news caused a stir among the prisoners, as the soldiers added that those proven innocent would be released, prompting William to stand up immediately to catch every word. Anyone unable to prove their origins would be executed, and an hour later, William's family arrived, with his little sister running toward him. The four of them shared a warm embrace as his father asked how he had gotten involved, leaving William only able to apologize while his sister asked where they were. As the family comforted one another, William's parents showed their deep concern, while Happy Face watched the heartwarming scene from inside the cell. William suddenly remembered something and turned back toward Happy Face, just as his father placed a familiar hand on his head. His father calmly but sharply remarked that those without families were forced to live like that, causing William to feel a heavy pressure weighing down on him. His body trembled as he recalled his father's words from childhood, claiming that some people were born to be slaves. Their fates had been sealed since birth, and as a young boy, he could only cry in fear, a terror that he still could not escape even as an adult. He didn't believe that was a reason for them to be executed, remembering how his father used to make him look toward the Yuan He Palace. Suddenly, his father angrily pulled him away, dragging him out of those memories and back to the present. The man shouted for William to shut up and follow him, as William moved like a puppet on a string, thinking about how he was still as weak as he had been years ago. His heart grew heavier as he lost the will to act on his own, feeling as though a surrounding darkness was swallowing his soul. From the shadows of the cell, Happy Face smiled and gently said it was okay, leaving William standing there with a dazed expression, unaware of what was behind the man. The arrow wounds on Happy Face's back were still seeping blood as the commander watched from above while William's family slowly departed. A soldier stepped forward to report that all the innocent had been released. The commander nodded and ordered the rest to be led to the gallows. Suddenly, the soldier added that there was a special case. The commander frowned as he recalled the letter and the image of Lucas Zinn. Lucas had once registered a gladiator as a church follower and donated a large sum. By church law, this man would avoid execution and serve as a lifelong slave for penance. The king had already granted approval, so the commander turned and asked who it was. The soldier replied that he had no real name, only the alias Gladiator. The commander suddenly remembered the image of Happy Face. He walked away in deep thought, finally understanding the meaning behind Lucas Zin's words. He recalled Lucas Zin saying this was repayment for the joy he never had, and he wondered who Happy Face was to be so protected. A week later at the desolate and gloomy slave market, Happy Face was locked in a small cage. A man walking by glanced at him. He asked the man in the hat sitting at the table if the new slave was insane since he just sat there smiling. The other man replied indifferently. He noted that no one would buy him, and the church didn't need more slaves, so he was being sold for next to nothing. Suddenly, someone pointed a cane at the cage and said they would buy him. The man in the hat turned in surprise, noting the slave wasn't a child. The visitor pointed the cane directly at Happy Face, clarifying they meant the one crying so piteously. Confusion appeared in Happy Face's eyes. It was a silver-haired old woman who gently said she would buy him, for in her eyes he was weeping. He was crying heart-wrenchingly. Later, in a cozy home with a table full of food and flickering candles, a young girl worriedly asked why she had bought a slave. She expressed concern about the old woman being alone with a slave, but the middle-aged man sitting opposite her reassured her that she often had to wait at the clinic anyway. He mentioned they were getting older and having help in the house was better. A servant carefully brought him a glass of beer as he offered a chicken leg to his daughter. Despite his words, she remained anxious about the dangers of the world and trusting a slave, but he calmly replied that the boy was a gentle child. He told her not to worry because the old woman was an excellent judge of character. The girl looked at him seriously and said she would come home tomorrow since she was off work. She wanted to see for herself if he was trustworthy. As sunset fell over the simple house among lush green fields, the tall boy stepped inside. The old woman told him to bathe and change since he hadn't done so since arriving. The sound of the door clicking shut caught her attention, making her frown. She wondered if those people had failed to feed him before gently ushering him to the bath, promising to cook dinner while he washed. She explained that while today was his first day, he would have to work for his meals starting tomorrow. He suddenly asked if that meant fighting. The old woman grew worried and told him not to say such frightening things. As he turned to the bathroom, she added that his work would involve washing dishes, cleaning, and gathering firewood for winter. She urged him to hurry. The boy entered the bathroom in a cheerful mood, slowly stripping off the cumbersome rags he was wearing. He tentatively dipped his foot into the water, expecting it to be freezing like his past hardships. To his surprise, the warmth touching his skin made him smile. The grime on his feet vanished instantly as he thought about how warm it felt. He slowly submerged himself in the tub, a sense of bliss spreading through his body. With a flushed face and a radiant smile, this was the first time Happy Face had experienced warm water. He felt as though all his past agony was being washed away. Everything here was warm: the clothes, the food, the house, and the people. After a cozy meal, the old woman tenderly applied medicine to the wounds on his back. Her hands were soft and gentle, every movement showing her care. She muttered about how cruel those people were to keep causing him to bleed like that. She assured him the medicine would help him heal quickly. He softly addressed her as mistress, but she told him to just call her grandma. He felt a sense of delight and repeated the word grandma before asking if he could go outside. They both fell silent as she meticulously finished applying the medicine to his back, and then he stepped out into the lingering sunset. He reached his large hand toward the sun. The light filtered through his fingers onto his youthful, innocent face, for the world outside was still very foreign to him. You felt the warmth of the sun's rays. It was a world away from the dim light that used to seep through the iron bars of the basement. Back then, he was still an innocent boy with wide, curious eyes, always eager to discover the world. A man spoke up. "Happy, the world outside that window is far grander than you think." He had shoulder-length hair and a long scar across his face as he spoke. "The world is vast and boundless. Once you are free, you will understand what I mean. You can go anywhere." Now, in the present, he could finally step out into that vast world. He turned back to look at the old woman's house, recalling her words. "If you want to leave, that's fine. I don't have the strength to keep you here anyway." His gaze suddenly darkened with a flicker of danger. He stepped into the house with a bright smile. "I've seen enough, Grandma," he said, walking toward her. His steps were like those of a toddler learning to walk, unsteady yet determined. He threw his arms around his father and called out in a fragile voice, "Father!" The man couldn't contain the joy in his heart. Now the old woman looked at him with that same gaze as he cheerfully set the table. "I'll work hard starting today." The old woman smiled warmly and replied, "That's wonderful." Suddenly the door opened and the old man called out, "Wife, come here," before freezing in shock. Before him stood a tall Happy, wearing an apron and cleaning the house. The old woman stepped out of the room and greeted him. "You're back." The old man scratched his head, bewildered. "Didn't you say you were bringing home a child?" She walked over and hugged him. Reaching only to his shoulder, she insisted loudly, "He is just a child." The old man gave a forced smile and nodded. "Is that so?" he thought to himself. "Winnie is going to throw a fit when she sees this tomorrow." He then said to the boy, "Well, let's all live well together from now on." He happily replied, "Yes." They looked like a blissful family with grandparents and their grandson. His eyes filled with joy as he watched their reflection in the window. Happy had just experienced the warmest day of his life. The scene shifts as a stone suddenly shatters the window. Meanwhile, that same night, William was enduring the coldest day of his life. His room was a mess with crumpled letters covering the table. They were full of insults. "Get out, you savage. You were a top student? Pathetic. Just kill yourself." Within a week, the story of the arena had spread through the academy, and William was treated like a criminal. Despite his cries of innocence, the stigma of witnessing the royalty's death remained. He had been at the arena, though in truth, William hadn't seen a thing. Because of this, he was stripped of his titles, and his church scholarship was cut off. An expulsion hearing was set, and everyone at the academy turned against him. Standing outside the principal's office, he saw his father through the glass, kneeling and begging, "Please, give him one more chance. You know he isn't that kind of boy. This is all the fault of a useless father. Please give him a chance." William gritted his teeth in rage. Unable to stand the sight of such humiliation, he quietly left. He began pounding on a door, shouting, "Senior, come out, this access card belongs to you, doesn't it? Come out and talk, I'm innocent," he screamed, hammering on the door. "I never even saw the royalty, I'm innocent." The door suddenly swung open, startling William. The senior peered out, looking at him with cold, indifferent eyes. "You think we're friends just because I played with you once? Get lost, you savage." William stood frozen, unable to believe his ears. The door opened wide to reveal a room full of people. The man mocked him, saying, "Look at him trying to blame me. How disgusting. What a scumbag." The people inside the room laughed mockingly without end. "What is he doing?" William's hand tightened around the card in his palm. Then, to everyone's surprise, he suddenly lunged forward. He charged at the senior, intending to use the card to strike the man down. But life didn't go his way. He was immediately restrained. The men holding him said irritably, "Are you actually trying to kill someone now? You've gone mad." He struggled with all his might but couldn't overpower the two of them. The senior smirked and said, "You're definitely getting expelled now." He lunged forward with everything he had and spat in the despicable man's face. "Shut your mouth, you piece of trash," he screamed. That night, William was kicked out of the dorm with his official hearing delayed until morning. Too ashamed to go home, he hid in the forest, weeping for his family. "Father, mother, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do." At that moment, Happy was busy gathering ingredients in the forest. He asked cheerfully, "Are you all right?" Happy's sudden appearance left William stunned. Why are you here?" "I thought you were dead," William cried out. Happy grinned, holding a vibrant mushroom. "I woke up hungry and decided to scavenge for a snack." "Here, have a taste," he said, offering the mushroom to William. William stared at him with a look of deep suspicion. "That's poisonous," Happy gasped, dropping the fungus immediately, narrowly escaping death. As they chatted, a group of men watched them secretly from a distance. The leader turned to his accomplices and asked if they were sure. The other man insisted he saw the boy leave the elite noble academy, confirming his status. The leader questioned who the companion was, joking if he was a noble's ghost. Meanwhile, William and Happy remained unaware, continuing their light-hearted play. "That one looks like a good target," one bandit remarked. The other replied, "He's just the village idiot. Nobles always keep a fool by their side." Their discussion concluded, the group drew their weapons with murderous intent, eager to plunder gold. Meanwhile, William and Happy continued their walk together. William asked if he was currently serving as a slave for the old woman. Happy nodded, pointing the way. William worried if leaving so freely would cause trouble. Happy explained that she allowed it as long as it didn't interfere with work. William mused that she must be kind, noting her apparent care for him. Happy chuckled, joking about his impending doom. He then asked William if he was all right and why he had been crying. William looked down dejectedly. Suddenly, the bandits emerged. Their leader, wielding a long sword, questioned why a noble child would venture onto such a perilous mountain. The two exchanged confused glances, showing no fear. As the rest of the gang surrounded them with various weapons, William gave a cold command. "Happy, get down." Before Happy could process the situation, William had already prostrated himself on the ground, clutching a pouch of coins. Trembling, he offered his gold and begged for mercy, promising all his wealth. The bandits mocked him, and the leader mockingly praised his quick reflexes while threatening him. "But our real targets are your parents. You're just the hostage." the leader declared. He ordered his men to bind them, and the gang lunged forward. William protested that he wasn't a noble, but they searched them anyway. One bandit snatched Happy's basket and inspected the food within. He chuckled at the contents, but before he could celebrate, a punch landed squarely on his face, sending him sprawling. The rest were left stunned and enraged. Why did he just collapse? Another bandit barked. Happy maintained his bright smile, prompting the man to realize he was responsible for the attack. Instantly, Happy delivered a powerful slap to the man's face. The sheer force left him dazed and defeated, leaving the others in utter shock. With a single blow, he had neutralized the large thug. Happy grinned menacingly, clenching his fists and advancing toward the bandits, unfazed by their weapons. "Kill him," the leader roared as the gang charged. Happy nimbly evaded the leader's sword swing and tripped him, just as another attacker lunged forward. Happy braced himself against the ground and delivered a powerful kick. Within moments, two bandits were face down on the dirt as another swung an axe. Happy caught the axe mid-swing with precision. He leaped into a spinning kick, twisting the bandit's arm and forcing a cry of agony from him. The leader scrambled up, horrified to see his men being decimated. Happy fought 5 at once, choking one while pummeling another as they begged for their lives. William watched in disbelief, breaking into a cold sweat. He realized he had nearly forgotten that despite his appearance, Happy was a former arena champion. His expression shifted into something demonic and terrifying. The bandits screamed in fear and fled, cursing him as they scrambled away. Happy returned to his cheerful self as if he hadn't just thrashed the gang. William stood frozen, staring at the ground in deep thought. He had dismantled an entire gang with nothing but his bare hands. William recalled that he had even defeated royal knights in the same manner. It was all done unarmed. William then noticed a piece of paper on one of the unconscious bandits. He wondered if it was a wanted poster for them. Had they gathered all the village's wanted posters? William's eyes were glued to an official arrest warrant, the bold black ink on the aged paper standing out. The targets are the entire nomadic bandit gang, wanted for murder, robbery, and kidnapping. Reports indicate a group of 5 has recently been active in the region. Suddenly, a phrase startled William. "Huh, the entire nomadic bandit gang?" He turned to Happy, his voice filled with surprise. "Happy, these people are that nomadic bandit gang." Happy looked cheerful but asked, "What is that?" William explained calmly, his eyes gleaming with knowledge. "It is the most notorious criminal organization in the Empire. Lately, they have even been active in the heart of the Empire, prompting the king to issue a very generous bounty for anyone who captures them. I had only heard of them, but this is the first time I have seen an official notice like this." He calculated silently, realizing the reward was much larger than he had imagined. Turning back to Happy, William continued with a smile. "If we hand them over to the Empire and report the achievement, we will receive the reward. Since you were the one who caught them, I will go with you to complete the claim procedures." Hearing this, Happy's eyes lit up and he cheered joyfully. A reward. The two quickly set off. Upon arriving at the local government office for the procedures, they met a stern-looking middle-aged official. The man glanced at Happy and coldly declared, "Slaves are not permitted to receive rewards." William immediately showed his indignation, his voice rising slightly. "What, he is my friend, I can fully vouch for him." The official looked at them, thinking to himself, "Friends, how ridiculous." He spoke. His voice remained unwavering. "That does not change his status," William eagerly suggested. "In that case, please list my name as the recipient. Would that be all right?" The old man seemed to compromise more easily than William expected. A slight smile appeared on his lips. "Very well, the bandits have been captured regardless. They only need to complete the paperwork according to the regulations." On the confirmation sheet, the reward was clearly listed as 1,013 gold coins for the crime of the nomadic bandit gang, the method of capture, and William as the captor. After finishing all the procedures, William handed Happy a heavy cloth bag. Happy accepted it happily, his face radiant. William smiled and advised him, "Now stop going out to dig for mushrooms. Use this money to go to the market and buy food." Happy grinned broadly. "Ah, thank you, William." However, he looked at William innocently, his large eyes full of questions. "But I do not know how to shop or how to use this money." William suddenly realized Happy's naivety. He thought to himself, "Does he really know nothing?" He said gently, "Then next time come with me, I will teach you everything." Happy replied joyfully, "That would be wonderful." The two had an intimate conversation which helped them grow closer. William asked with concern, "So besides the arena, you know nothing of the outside world?" Happy was still preoccupied playing with a small snail in his hand. He replied innocently, "Yes, I have only heard stories from others. Everything is so new and I find it all fascinating." They promised to meet again. William pointed toward his house and said, "Ah, my home is over there. Let's meet again when you are free." Happy happily agreed, "Sure." Then the two said their goodbyes. William smiled and waved, "See you later." Happy called out, Goodbye." Then he turned away, the snail still perched on his head. William watched Happy's figure fade into the distance, a hint of regret in his eyes. He turned around, his face sad as he let out a long sigh, his head hanging low. The next morning at the Academy Hall, it was packed with people for the hearing regarding William's expulsion. A high-ranking official looked at William, thinking to himself that there were clearly no significant injuries. Meanwhile, to one side, the senior student was trying to look distressed, with a bandage loosely stuck to his forehead to hide his fake wound. The presiding official stood up and solemnly read William's name. "After a fair review, I shall deliver the verdict." William kept his head down, not daring to look at anyone. The man continued, "William, regarding the altercation with your classmate at the arena, you should have received a fitting punishment. However, thanks to your great contribution in taking down a portion of the nomadic bandit gang, the Empire's most dangerous criminal organization known for murdering and kidnapping nobles, you will be awarded a Medal of Honor." William was completely stunned, utterly shocked as he saw the shimmering medal pinned to his chest. His parents, sitting below, were equally surprised. That noble senior could not hide his dissatisfaction and roared, "What?" The official continued, "Despite being a student, William fought bravely for the safety of the Empire. By the king's order, your offenses are pardoned, and you shall be given another chance." The senior student stood up abruptly, his face flushed with rage. "Impossible!" Throughout the hall, whispers and murmurs erupted incessantly. "What is going on? Is that really William?" He spoke loudly, his eyes full of contempt as he looked toward William's parents, who were simple people dressed in common clothes. His parents must have used money to bribe the officials. He ripped the bandage off his head, gritting his teeth in hatred. "Damn it! I intended to finish him off in one go." Meanwhile, the night before meeting William, Happy endured a grueling ordeal, unable to sleep a wink due to a strange and inexplicable pain. Huddled under his small blanket with terrifyingly bloodshot eyes, his entire body trembled uncontrollably as he wrapped his arms tightly around himself to soothe the agony. Yet the persistent pain forced him to investigate the cause. Lifting his shirt revealed countless scars of all sizes as sweat poured off him and soaked his clothes. He glanced toward a basket, wondering if hunger was the culprit. But the truth was that his body had grown accustomed to a different life. Having survived the brutal combat of the arena, he could not adapt to this sudden tranquility. Happy's body surged with a murderous aura, and his eyes flashed with danger as he shook involuntarily. However, thanks to the previous night's clash with the bandits, his body returned to its familiar state, allowing Happy to enjoy his most comfortable morning since leaving the arena. He woke up looking refreshed and exclaimed that it was his first good night's sleep since leaving that place. As gentle morning sunlight filtered through the window, Happy smiled and enjoyed the warmth until a clear voice suddenly called out from outside. "Grandmother, I'm home," she called out, making Happy jump up as the elderly couple rushed to greet their granddaughter, with the grandmother hugging her tightly and ushering her inside. The girl beamed with a bright smile and a cheerful voice, saying how much she missed her grandmother before asking where the child they had mentioned was. The old man gave a forced smile and pointed behind him, saying the boy was inside, while the girl happily pulled out an intricately carved wooden duck. She explained that she had bought a gift at the market for him, thinking he might be shy in a new environment and wanting to make a good first impression. The girl suddenly fell silent as the child she was talking about turned out to be a tall, grown man with an innocent yet awkward expression, and the two of them stood there staring at each other. Shocked, the girl dropped the wooden duck and cried out in alarm, asking who he was and if this man was truly the child her grandmother had brought home. The old man silently nodded in confirmation while Happy, completely unaware of the girl's shock, cheerfully waved and introduced himself inside the simple little house. Surrounded by lush green fields, the granddaughter whispered to her grandfather that the man didn't look like a child at all, especially considering he came from the arena. After she called him terrifying, the old man smiled kindly and told her to observe him a bit longer, noting that although they had just met, the boy seemed like a good person. He looked over at Happy working diligently, and as both grandfather and granddaughter gazed out the window, the old man smiled and continued speaking. Furthermore, seeing his wife so happy made him very glad, and the old man insisted that the boy was certainly the most cheerful person he had ever encountered. Despite the granddaughter's lingering doubts, the boy proved to be a very capable worker. Happy, carrying a large crate, smiled and asked the grandmother for instructions. "Grandmother, where should I put this?" he asked, and as she pointed toward the corner of the garden, the granddaughter watched her grandfather's happy expression and wondered if he truly enjoyed saying such things. Meanwhile, the old man was lost in his own thoughts, reflecting on how much easier life had become now that he no longer had to delay cleaning the warehouse due to his years of back pain. The girl still couldn't fully trust this large man as her internal doubts persisted. Outside, under a clear blue sky dotted with fluffy white clouds and bright sunshine, Piles of wood lay scattered near an axe on the ground. Picking up the axe, she muttered that she could manage on her own without a slave, and began carefully splitting the logs one by one with all her strength. Through her own efforts, she managed to chop a decent amount of firewood while Happy cheerfully went about his tasks, carrying water as she continued her work. The girl let out a weary sigh when Happy returned, asking if he was finished with the water. He cheerfully confirmed that the bath water was ready, and when she told him to rest while she finished the wood, Happy replied politely. Agreeing, he set down the water poles and sat right there, his large eyes fixed intently on her without blinking, which made the girl feel rather self-conscious. Feeling awkward, she finally asked why he didn't go rest instead of just staring, to which Happy cheerfully replied that he was learning since he would eventually have to do those chores, making her think to herself that he had a good attitude. She told him to go ahead and watch then, and feeling a bit prideful, she gripped the axe firmly, raised it high above her head with a confident gaze, and swung it down with all her might. Unfortunately, the blade missed its mark, sending a small splinter of wood flying into the air, where it spun before landing right where Happy was sitting. As they both stared at the piece of wood, her face turned bright red with embarrassment, and unable to find words, she suddenly shouted in an attempt to hide her shame. She barked that small pieces like that were necessary for starting a fire and asked if he understood. Determined not to let herself be humiliated again, she swung the axe high and brought it down with all her might, finally splitting the wood as a radiant smile spread across her face. Happy shared in her joy as she turned to him and pointed at her achievement with pride, asking, "See that? Did you see?" Happy enthusiastically agreed, while the old man watched the two children laughing from the house, feeling a warmth in his own heart as he observed them. The old man thought Winnie was a good girl despite her words, just as the old woman arrived and told her she didn't need to chop wood anymore. Winnie thought she hadn't done enough, but the old woman explained that Happy had finished it all last night, leaving Winnie staring at the massive pile in shock. Confusion filled Winnie's heart, while Happy stood behind her with his usual cheerful expression, but her face darkened as she turned to look at him. When asked why he claimed to be learning, Happy admitted his shoulders were sore from yesterday, so he just wanted to observe the proper form, much to Winnie's frustration. She complained that he should have told her so she wouldn't have wasted her effort, then angrily asked why he was smirking at her. She angrily asked if he was mocking her, but the old woman quickly intervened, praising Happy for his hard work and telling Winnie to go rest. Winnie whimpered for her grandmother, who gently patted Happy's back and thanked him for his efforts today, to which Happy politely replied. Winnie turned away in a huff, and as dusk fell, the bathroom became shrouded in a thick, misty veil of rising steam. Soaking in the tub, Winnie reflected that having an extra hand around was quite nice, leaning back as she enjoyed the reduced workload and comfort. After her bath, Winnie sat in her room drying her hair when she heard a noise outside and noticed Happy seemingly preparing to head out. She sat up with a sigh of relief, but then paused and looked out the window to see Happy leaving the house with a basket on his back. She wondered where he was going so late, and when the old woman called out to him, Winnie questioned why he hadn't said anything to anyone. The old woman noted that she had given him free time, but the old man mentioned seeing him go out and return the previous night as well. While Winnie wondered about his errands, Happy tightened his basket straps and knocked on a door, calling for William until a little girl answered. William ushered Lee back inside and told her to be good while he stepped out, silencing her when she asked where he was going. The girl whispered to ask if Happy was his friend from the library, and William smiled as he confirmed that he was. After the girl waved goodbye, William told her to behave and then turned to Happy, admitting he hadn't expected him to come by. William said he was free to go since Happy was his savior, then suggested they talk while they walked toward their destination. He asked if Happy wanted to head to the market, but Happy reached into his basket and pulled out several wanted posters, showing him where he wanted to go. William looked at the poster for the armored giant, a fugitive wanted for murder, and realized Happy was holding yet another bounty notice. Happy cheerfully explained that he wanted to hunt these criminals like before but couldn't read the locations, asking William for his help. Realizing it was for the bounty, William watched as Happy excitedly held up his coin pouch, suggesting they split the reward like last time. Drawn to Happy's unique style, William helped him hunt bounties every night, providing Happy with a legal way to soothe his nightly pain through combat. Sitting together on a cargo wagon, Happy asked if they had found a target, and William confirmed he had spent the night researching and was ready. They returned to a familiar spot where William picked up more posters, but his constant nightly excursions began to raise suspicions within his family. William's father eventually asked if he was heading to the library again, a sudden question that caught William completely off guard. His little sister burst into tears, sobbing that he never played with her anymore because he spent every single night going out with that person. Ignoring his father's questions and his sister's soft weeping, William resolutely departed as his parents watched him go with suspicion and doubt. Inside the elderly woman's house, the wooden duck remained by the window while Winnie searched Happy's room and suddenly cried out in shock. Winnie was stunned to find a massive pile of money hidden under the bed, wondering what on earth he was doing every night. Deep within a dark cavern filled with golden reflections, a wanted criminal clad in massive armor stood waiting outside the entrance. This terrifying man had single-handedly slaughtered all the guards, noting that the laziness of local bandits had caused the sentry presence to increase. He mused that while the spirit armor used to ignore him, the Empire's atmosphere had changed, and the bounties were now attracting far too many pests. He looked at the wanted poster being held up before him as Happy appeared, laughing while pointing directly at the criminal. William turned pale with terror as he realized they had actually found him, feeling a sense of impending doom as he struggled to process the situation. He couldn't understand why such a monster was here when he had specifically chosen the lowest bounty, just as the armored giant leveled a weapon at him. The giant growled that they were clearly amateur bounty hunters who had come to the wrong place, telling them to shut up and get out. He bluntly explained that his bounty was merely a formality triggered by the recent activities of wandering bandit groups. William questioned if the man had remained free despite being a criminal simply because no one was capable of capturing him, forcing a strained smile. Just as William prepared to leave, a thunderous sound erupted as Happy suddenly lunged forward to attack the giant head-on. The giant reacted quickly to block the strike, grinning with delight that the boy had dared to attack him with his bare hands. Despite taking a heavy counterattack that should have shattered his bones, Happy laughed as if unhurt, while a panicked William begged him to stop and run. With a cold declaration that it was too late, the giant launched a lightning-fast strike using his massive shield. He told them they should have left while he was being merciful, swinging his enormous war hammer with such terrifying speed that it left blurs in the air. He unleashed a barrage of heaven-shaking blows that forced Happy back, leaving William unable to maintain his composure as he watched. William screamed for them to stop, causing Happy to glance back with a look of confusion as the boy shouted that Happy's fighting style in the arena wasn't cruel. He emotionally cried out that he only wanted to keep watching because he believed Happy was cool and would surely emerge victorious. William admitted he had been reckless in agreeing to the bounty hunt, even though Happy's help with the bandits was the reason he could return to the academy. Tears streamed down William's face as he apologized, realizing he had pushed Happy into a death trap instead of a fair match like those in the arena. Without a word, the giant swung his spear at William, but Happy managed to pull the boy back just in time to evade the strike. Wearing his signature smile, Happy remarked that William truly was an arena novice before kicking the giant's mace away with incredible speed. As Happy caught the mace, he recalled his former master, Lucas, a man who had been driven completely mad by his lust for power. Happy remembered how he always won his battles, yet Lucas would constantly search the world for even stronger opponents because the matches ended too quickly. Because the quick victories didn't generate enough profit, Lucas became increasingly frustrated with him. To satisfy his master, Happy had been forced to act as if he were losing, but now he simply smiled and tossed the giant's spear aside. He raised his hand as if signaling a new move, leaving William watching with a mixture of astonishment and lingering anxiety. While the giant looked on with pure spite, Happy provoked him by stating that he had never once fought for his own pleasure before. A horrific memory resurfaced. He knew that if he didn't obey, he would be tortured to death, an agony that remained deeply etched into his very soul. It drove him to seek out conflict even after escaping the arena, and before he could finish his thought, Happy unleashed a barrage of strikes at his opponent, who claimed the attacks were harmless. The man delivered powerful slashes toward Happy with a loud roar, pouring all his strength into a relentless and unceasing assault. Happy evaded the strikes unscathed, while the man panted heavily, unable to comprehend what was happening or what the hell was going on. He sensed something was amiss as Happy dodged every single blow of his frantic assault, leaving him baffled since the boy had nearly died moments ago. He glared at Happy with resentment, wondering why he was so calm, then gripped his spear to exert superior force with a shout, only to lose his footing. Happy firmly locked the hand holding the spear, leaving the man in a state of shock and unable to react as he struggled to break free from the grip amidst a sudden gust of wind. The man attempted a counterlock by grabbing Happy, but Happy held his ground with superior strength before suddenly releasing the man's sleeve, causing him to stumble. As he lunged forward with a panicked cry, Happy took the initiative and delivered a spinning kick to his back, fueling the man's rage over losing control of the fight. His eyes flashed with displeasure as he tried to retaliate with a kick, but Happy dodged it, leaving the man fuming with resentment as he cursed the bastard. Without a word, Happy delivered a devastating kick to the man's supporting leg, and as he recoiled in pain, Happy hauled him up and locked him in a chokehold. The man collapsed to the ground, his strength nearly depleted from the fall, while the dominant Happy followed up with a kick to his abdomen. With an amused expression, Happy landed another kick and unleashed a flurry of rapid strikes that sent the man tumbling across the ground. Happy continued his assault by grabbing the man and striking him repeatedly. Though he tried to resist, his arm was pinned to the ground by Happy's foot as he panted from his mounting injuries. The man stood up wearily, while Happy remained light on his feet with a provocative look, as William watched from behind a rock and noted that they had both stopped. The bandit grew weary from his heavy equipment and shifted to a defensive stance with his shield to protect his unarmored head, while Happy turned to thank William for his protection. "You are my only friend, and I would be saddened if you were hurt," Happy said as he slowly picked up a broken spearhead and stared intensely at his opponent. His opponent scoffed, asking if he really intended to use that broken spear when his own shield and armor had already shattered every other weapon in the vicinity. "Do you actually plan to fight me with that?" the man asked. But Happy suddenly hurled the spearhead at him, which he blocked with his shield while looking completely bewildered. Suddenly, the man froze as Happy appeared before him and plunged the broken spearhead into his abdomen, using all his strength to hoist the man into the air. Despite his desperate struggles, the pain only intensified with every movement, and as Happy told him to give up with a demonic gaze, the man's strength finally failed him. He collapsed heavily to the ground and lost consciousness, leaving William worried that while he knew Happy was strong, this display of power had exceeded all limits. Is this Happy's full strength? William wondered in shock, but Happy simply smiled and nonchalantly stated that the man had only fainted from the intense pain. "This isn't very good, is it? It wasn't a fair fight, and my master absolutely detests matches like this." William was thrilled. The battle had been spectacular, and capturing such a high-profile criminal was truly impressive. With a look of complete conviction in what he had witnessed, he remarked that there was no longer any reason to fret over combat. "I have full confidence in you now," he said. Happy inquired if everything was finished, to which William replied by asking if they were departing immediately, though Happy appeared utterly exhausted. "No, I haven't slept in days, so I'll just take a quick nap right here," Happy explained. William looked on in disbelief as Happy made himself comfortable on the ground to rest after the struggle. "To be honest, I'm drained now that the fight is over, so I'll leave the rest to you," Happy murmured. William stood there perplexed, wondering if his companion had truly fallen asleep and what his next move should be. Contemplating whether to leave him there to file a report, William picked up the broken spearhead and wondered what weapon Happy had actually used to defeat the foe. If the spear was merely a diversion, he questioned if Happy had a concealed weapon or something hidden within himself. William approached the man and tried to lift him, but he gasped for air as he struggled with the immense weight. He marveled at how Happy had managed to carry him before realizing time was short and rushing off to report the incident. Just then, the captain of the Royal Guard arrived, and the two men locked eyes. When the captain asked if he was the one who captured the criminal, William was momentarily speechless until a soldier chimed in. "I nearly lost my life back there, but I managed to escape and call for Imperial reinforcements," the soldier said, noting that he had seen William entering the forest earlier with a bounty poster in hand. The soldier exclaimed, realizing William had come to hunt the bounty, and asked for his name. A flustered William introduced himself, but his words were quickly drowned out by the commotion of the other soldiers. "William, isn't he the student who recently took down that band of exiled brigands?" The soldiers whispered in awe, marveling at the idea that he had accomplished such a feat using only a broken spear. They expressed their admiration, noting that his martial skills were as legendary as the rumors suggested. A bashful William asked about these rumors, and a soldier confirmed that stories about him were even circulating within the knightly orders. Tales of a student who hunted bounties for sport and treated exiled bandits like mere trifles had become the latest sensation. William, however, remained oblivious to the fact that he had become the talk of the town. "Do you mind if we take over the scene and handle the prisoner's bounty from here?" the soldier asked. William thanked them and agreed, after which the soldier offered to escort him out of the woods. One of the men spotted Happy lying motionless on the ground and cried out, assuming the porter had been caught in the crossfire of the intense battle. The captain narrowed his eyes, his pensive gaze suggesting he had detected something unusual about the situation. Noticing this, a soldier confusedly asked if something was the matter. After a thorough inspection, the captain shook his head and noted that the wound wasn't from a direct thrust, as the spearhead lacked fresh blood and appeared to only have been splattered by stray droplets. Scanning the area, the captain observed that all the weapons remained untouched and that there were no sharp objects present capable of inflicting such a specific injury on the man. The soldier grew even more perplexed, wondering how the man had been wounded, while William quietly hoisted Happy onto his back and prepared to depart. Watching them leave, a soldier expressed concern that the porter seemed gravely injured, but William calmly reassured him that the boy was simply fast asleep. Captain squinted as he watched William walk away, his initial suspicions deepening. It seemed utterly implausible that an ordinary student could have apprehended the entire band of exiled brigands single-handedly. Deep within a cavernous hideout, a man covered in wounds knelt before a terrifying, scarred figure who snarled that since they had already been forsaken once, there was no longer any place for them to run. And yet you groveled before arrogant aristocrats and were defeated by a mere student, the leader spat. The man on the ground pleaded for forgiveness, but he was nonetheless dealt with ruthlessly. With a menacing glare, he reminded them that they were no ordinary thieves. As exiled brigands, they were sworn to fight the Empire until their very last breath. He turned to a woman nearby and asked if she had looked into the student, to which she replied that his name was William, a bounty hunter who had recently risen to prominence. The scarred man immediately declared William as their next target, while the blood of the fallen pooled on the floor, creating a gruesome and chilling sight. In a grand manner, a nobleman inquired about the student's lineage, only for another to bark back that the boy possessed no noble standing whatsoever. His parents are merely wealthy merchants who bought their way into society, he claimed, dismissing the boy's reputation as a bounty hunter as nothing more than the result of bribing officials. Handing a document to a young man with curly hair, he ordered him to show the boy the consequences of insulting their house. The young man looked down to see the brigand treaty in his hands. When asked what it was, the elder explained it was a secret organization of assassins employed by their family, instructing the youth to go there and order William's execution as a dark aura filled the room. Both Lao Raiju and Saga were stunned by the news that 3 corpses had been discovered this morning on the main road leading into the kingdom. Saga wondered how an autopsy could be performed if the body had been moved, questioning if the case was already closed. It looked like a homicide, but the grumpy scavenger snapped at him to stop with the nonsense reports, citing the previous arena incident. That ordeal had nearly landed him in prison. As he cleaned, the old man explained that the victims were merely exiled bandits, so there was no need for an investigation. In this kingdom, no one mourned their passing. In fact, people would likely celebrate. However, Saga sensed something was amiss and began to examine the corpses with great care. Bruises on their bodies appeared fresh, likely sustained only a few days before their deaths. They bore a striking resemblance to the corpses recently discovered at the arena. Winnie walked in, announcing her arrival with the various herbs the old man had requested. As she offered to take them inside, the old man greeted her, noting how hard she worked. He asked if her grandfather was doing well, to which she confirmed he was. The old man playfully teased her, remarking that the old fellow didn't seem to have a single worry in the world. He joked that he would likely pass away before her grandfather did. Winnie sighed that he was starting again and waved to Saga, who greeted her with surprise as she mentioned bringing herbs for him as well. She offered to set them down, leaving Saga feeling a bit bashful as he asked if they were truly for him. She looked at him curiously, asking if he didn't like the gesture. They both shared an awkward laugh before Saga quickly clarified that he was always grateful for her help. The old man praised her kindness, noting she could have sold the herbs, but she giggled and said she wanted to provide for Saga since she already helped the old man. As they chatted quietly, Winnie mentioned that the old man's previous slaves hadn't lasted a week, yet Saga had already been there for over a month. She assumed the old man must be very pleased with him this time. The old man nodded in satisfaction but expressed curiosity, noting that while Saga worked well, he was indiscreet and wandered off every night. Winnie remained silent, prompting the old man to look at her and ask what was wrong. She softly admitted that something similar was happening at her place, which shocked the old man, who asked if they had also purchased a slave. She confirmed it but noted how suspicious it was, as the man went out every night and hid bags of money from unknown sources under his feet. The two continued to whisper. Winnie added that his past as an arena fighter made her even more anxious. Her doubts about Saga's identity and whether he was involved in something shady continued to grow. Saga, who had been standing nearby and overheard the conversation, stepped closer and noted that the city only had one arena, which had recently vanished. He added that all the fighters there had been executed. Winnie was taken aback, insisting that the man had definitely been a gladiator. Wanting to clear all suspicion, Saga explained that those fighters were either prisoners or dangerous criminals. He continued, stating that if a homeless person with no connections survived, they must have powerful backing. It would have to be a backing strong enough to influence even the king's decrees. Saga concluded by proposing that she might have brought home a dangerous individual. He offered to investigate if she provided the slave documents. Winnie, also wanting the truth, agreed and asked for his assistance. He promised to look into it tonight and return the next day. After hearing about the gladiators, the old man turned to Saga and warned him that he would surely meet an early grave. He cautioned that if Saga kept trying, he would find a blade before he found the truth. Saga firmly replied that his only wish was for the world to be filled with good people. He spoke with total sincerity. Meanwhile, William and Happy were finally emerging from the forest. William whispered for Happy to wake up. He had stayed awake for several nights and was now sleeping like the dead. In the darkness, following William's long strides, they spotted a house with its lights still on. William approached and asked if anyone was home. An old woman peered out, with 3 other people visible inside the house. Seeing Happy unconscious, she cried out in alarm, but William reassured her that he was simply asleep and there was no cause for concern. Winnie curiously asked William if the 2 of them had been bounty hunting every night. He cheerfully confirmed it, and the story began as William recounted everything he knew about Happy. Happy had spent his entire life in the arena and suffered from facial nerve damage. He endured such intense physical agony that he was unable to sleep. This condition forced him to fight continuously. William explained Happy's circumstances with the clarity and detail of a top student. Upon hearing the story, the old woman began to weep. The old man listened in silence, while the suspicions and anxieties Winnie had harbored began to fade away. Her negative assumptions about William and Happy were finally dispelled. William concluded his tale by revealing that Happy was the benefactor who had saved his life. Afterward, William gave a polite bow and took his leave. The next morning, Happy woke up in a daze. Winnie curiously asked him why he hadn't mentioned being in so much pain that he couldn't sleep. She scolded him for hiding his expressions and causing misunderstandings. Happy blamed himself, muttering that useless things are always discarded. That was how people treated one another in the arena. As the tension in the room eased, Winnie gently replied that this was not the arena. She assured him they didn't view him as a slave, as the grandmother already considered him family. They would heal him, so he had to stop fighting. Family would help him lead a normal life. Happy was overjoyed. Winnie let go of her prejudices against gladiators and teased that she was a pharmacist for a reason. Reaching out to him, she tenderly asked him to trust her to cure him. Happy agreed, then pulled an object from his pocket. He explained he bought it with his first earnings. Winnie was bewildered, wondering what it was and what he was planning to do. He quickly slipped it onto her middle finger, shocking her with the wedding ring. He didn't understand its meaning, while she was too flustered to explain. The grandparents walked in, smiling as they told Happy that William had brought his prize money. Happy felt deeply loved by everyone. He told them to keep the money since he was done fighting and Winnie would treat him. The old man happily embraced him. Calling him his dear grandson, the old man accepted the gift. The 4 of them shared a happy moment as Winnie had a realization. She finally understood why the grandmother called him her son, as he was as pure as a child. Laughter filled the room as Happy distributed the rewards. He gave the money to the grandparents. Meanwhile, Saga opened a letter and scanned the brief message stating that yesterday's misunderstandings were settled. The investigation was no longer needed. Though things seemed peaceful, William Sr. suddenly appeared. Looking awkward and apologetic, he whispered an apology and offered a meal. William responded coldly, showing his lingering resentment. He stated they were no longer classmates, but the senior begged for a chance, claiming he deeply regretted his actions. Seeing this, William's resolve softened. He sighed and told the man to stand up. He suggested they just talk instead of eating. Saga, watching from a distance, scoffed at the man's deceptive performance. Soon after, the man revealed his true colors by pushing William into a deep pit. William fell, hitting the ground in agonizing pain. 3 strangers appeared as William, dazed and reeling, struggled to ask who they were. Violent, relentless punches rained down on him. Completely confused by the assault, William could only weakly ask why this was happening. He pleaded for them to stop. A man stood over him with a look of pure disdain, admitting he had hated William from the start. William struggled to speak, asking what he had done wrong. The man blamed him for everything, refusing to take responsibility for his own faults. A powerful kick struck William's face, sending him sprawling. The man mocked him for not knowing his place and clinging to trash. He beat William mercilessly, mocking the idea that academic success earned recognition. He grabbed William's collar and screamed at him. He shouted that only those from wealthy, powerful families mattered. His face was twisted with extreme contempt. He claimed every student hated William for being a nobody who tried to climb too high. He sneered that everyone would celebrate his death and told him to learn how to kneel before learning to write in his next life. He ordered the 3 soldiers to finish the job while he waited outside. Saga, still hidden, began to piece William's story together. They were the Brigante mercenaries, professional assassins. He had expected mere bullying, not a contract for murder. Saga pondered with a hardened expression, disgusted by the nobility's methods. He had hoped for a chance to hunt the Brigante, but he never expected it to happen today. Saga slipped into the building like a flash and hid in the shadows as they continued to torment William, mockingly questioning his reputation as a bounty hunter. They sneered that he was just a dull brat and threatened to end his life in the most agonizing way possible, claiming their boss wanted his death to be slow and painful. William felt excruciating pain throughout his body, yet his mind was filled with bitter questions about his efforts as he gritted his teeth, his resolve unshaken despite the hardships he faced. He thought bitterly about dying for the mere whims of the nobility while struggling to stand, as the three soldiers continued their relentless provocations. They mocked him for trying to stand, saying a man should fight before he dies, but William's inner determination and resolve remained completely unchanged. He refused to let his journey end this way, having dreamed of becoming a catalyst for change, only to realize that such power required status, just as a woman appeared with a cryptic smile. "Forgive me, but do not look at me with those eyes," she said, her cold gaze fixed on William as she asked his name, leaving the soldiers bewildered by her sudden appearance. They questioned each other in a panic, but before they could react, a sudden and powerful strike from her sent all three soldiers crashing backward. She stared directly at William and demanded to know if he was indeed the one she sought, declaring that someone like him could never have defeated 5 exiled bandits. She continued, noting that there were 2 people at the scene, and she had assumed the bounty hunter was the one responsible, only to find that the truth was the exact opposite. As she interrogated the exhausted William about the identity of the other person, the soldiers scrambled up and cried out in terror upon realizing she was from the exiled bandits. A soldier pointed his sword at them and sneered, calling them sewer rats and threatening to take her head if she didn't vanish immediately. With a simple, light gesture, she sent the 3 soldiers crashing to the floor once more, leaving William wide-eyed and unable to comprehend what was happening. Without any hesitation, she spoke in an infuriatingly sweet tone, remarking that if they still had necks, she would chain them up like dogs and lead them away. Turning back to William with a lingering smile, she noted the newfound silence and suggested they resume their conversation as the room grew still. As the 2 of them spoke, Saga remained hidden on the roof, listening to their exchange while still feeling that many mysteries remained regarding the situation. Saga wondered if she was the leader or the deputy of the bandits, and why everyone from the underground arena to the nobility wanted William dead. Sensing the gravity of the situation, realized that something far more significant was unfolding, and decided that, regardless of the reason, this situation was beyond his involvement, and he needed to withdraw. Her tone turned grave as she resumed her interrogation, pressing a cold, sharp blade against William's neck and demanding to know who had been with him at that time. He threatened to take his head if he didn't speak quickly, while William, enduring immense pain, found his mind drifting back to his memories of Happy. He recalled Happy's words during their encounter with the armored giant, thanking him for his protection but pleading with him not to do it again because he was his only friend. Unable to hold back his tears, William cried out the name of his friend, Happy Face Happy, the former arena slave who was now living on a farm. Saga frowned upon hearing those words as he departed. While back at the Winnie family farm, Happy remained completely unaware of the danger William was facing. Filled with concern, he thought about finding William to tell him to quit bounty hunting, enjoying his new life with his family while never forgetting his dear friend. While cherishing his happy family and planning a gift for his friend William, Karina was staring intently at the young man before her. In a nonchalant tone, she told him he was too weak to be worth killing, and that she wouldn't have bothered slaughtering his entire family had she known he was so useless. His eyes widened in shock across his bruised face as he asked what she meant, to which Karina bluntly replied that they always exterminated entire lineages when seeking revenge. She frowned at William with a flicker of pity in her eyes, informing him that she had sent men to his home as a precaution, and they had likely arrived by now. Just as Karina said, the bandits were already at William's door. She then released him and prepared to leave to find Happy while William knelt on the ground in agony. Watching Karina open the door and depart, he could only reach out in a futile attempt to stop her. His face turned deathly pale, and his vision blurred with tears as he recalled a past conversation with Happy, who had remarked on how joyful he seemed and how much his mother clearly cared for him. Happy had replied with a bright smile, admitting he thought he was a goner, while William's mind filled with images of his loved ones and those who had saved his life. He thought of his family, who always showered him with love and protection. And as William's hands tightened into fists, he sank into utter despair, his head bowed and his hands trembling uncontrollably as he questioned his own work. Feeling completely useless, he lamented that if he were stronger, it would have been enough for them to just kill him, as Karina would have focused solely on him without harming anyone else. "Get lost, just kill me," he muttered, a wave of deep regret surging within him as he realized that if he hadn't been drawn into this from the beginning, none of this would have happened. He remembered when Curly tried to entice him to join, and though William had refused at the time, he now looked back with regret on his decision to go. William gritted his teeth as tears streamed down his face, feeling he was living in disgrace and unable to protect anyone. He blamed himself intensely, realizing that by closing his eyes and turning away, he had failed to protect them. His friends, his family, everyone was gone, and in the eerie silence, only the sound of his own sobbing remained until he suddenly forced himself to stand, vowing that he had to change. His eyes blazed with intensity and his face contorted. If it wasn't too late, he had to transform, so William staggered forward, ignoring his bleeding wounds, desperate to change even a fraction of himself if it meant he could protect others. He snatched a sword from the floor, radiating an aura of pure fury and resentment as he prepared to change. While elsewhere, Curly was acting suspiciously, glancing back and wondering when the task would be finished. "Hurry up, why is the door open? What if someone sees us?" he hissed, but then he noticed something and glanced to the side where William had abruptly appeared. With a terrifyingly cold expression, William stood before a stunned and pale Curly, having single-handedly slaughtered all of his accomplices, causing the terrified man to stumble backward and let out a horrified scream. He lost his balance and fell face first onto the ground, gritting his teeth in agony as William approached him slowly. Each of William's footsteps felt like a hammer blow to Curly's psyche, and his eyes bulged with terror as he found himself paralyzed and unable to flee. Thinking quickly, Curly immediately knelt and kowtowed before William, his voice frantic as he begged for forgiveness while wondering how the boy had become so powerful. He wondered if the boy was truly that strong as he abandoned all pride, crawling to William's feet to lick his boots like a dog desperate for its master's favor, fearing that his death was imminent. "Please spare me, I'll be your dog. Please have mercy," he pleaded, though internally he was cursing William, who remained completely unmoved. He coldly uttered a single word, "Begone," before stepping past Curly, who clutched his head in fear, expecting to be killed. His entire body shook as he gritted his teeth, waiting for the Reaper to take him. But after a moment, Curly realized nothing had happened. He glanced back and cried out in shock as he saw his father looking down at his cowering form with clear disappointment, asking how he had handled things. Ignoring the newcomer, William walked straight toward Curly's father, who looked on in confusion as the boy radiated an overwhelming murderous intent. With a gaze sharp enough to kill, William commanded, "Don't block my path. Get lost," leaving Curly's father frozen with his eyes wide in disbelief. Eventually, the father lowered his gaze and stepped aside to let William pass, prompting Curly to cry out in disbelief at his father's submission. His father could do nothing but bow his head in silent submission, unable to look William in the eye, while William sneered inwardly at the sight. He realized that no matter how much one proves themselves, those who look down on others will always bow to a blade, a sight he had longed for back when he only held a pen. He tightened his grip on the sword, knowing this cruel world had taught him that his voice would only be heard once he took up arms. He had to wield both the pen and the sword. As William walked, leaving bloody footprints behind, he realized this was no longer a path to death but a journey toward redemption. Elsewhere, William's family opened their door after hearing a knock, only to find Happy standing there. He waved a hand in greeting, introducing himself as Happy and asking to see William, before the family of three invited him inside to talk. William's mother served Happy a bowl of soup with a gentle smile as she acknowledged the news of William's bounty hunting, while his father added that he had only remained still until he saw his son take up the hunt. Seeing that Ellie had a good friend helping her, she puffed out her cheeks in displeasure and said, "But I hate it. Lately, William hasn't played with me at all. He's with you all the time." Hearing the little girl's complaint, Smiling Face replied that he had decided to stop bounty hunting, which immediately made Ellie joyful. She asked again to confirm if it was true, then crossed her arms and tilted her chin up with an arrogant look, saying she might reconsider her opinion of him. William's mother pulled out a chair and sat down, her voice very gentle as she told him he made the right choice, since bounty hunting was far too dangerous for a student. William's father spoke bluntly, remarking that one could tell he was from a noble family just by looking at him, being both academically gifted and skilled in martial arts. Smiling Face replied with a grin that he was a slave. As soon as he finished speaking, the house fell silent, and William's parents looked utterly bewildered. His father couldn't help but ask curiously if he was joking, wondering how a slave could possibly attend school with William, but Smiling Face answered honestly without hiding anything. He explained that he didn't go to school and only did bounty hunting because of William since he was illiterate. William's father's hand retracted slightly from the table while his mother's face grew tense. William's father's lips trembled as he continued, muttering "slave," while furrowing his brows deeply, his tone unable to hide his rising anger and disdain. He asked if a slave now dared to sit at the same dining table, questioning if his master had failed to discipline him, causing the atmosphere to become incredibly strained. Just minutes ago, everyone had been happy and sociable, but now William's father glared at Smiling Face with a warning, stating that he finally understood. He told him to get out of his sight and never associate with William again. Smiling Face lowered his head, using one hand to tightly grip his other arm. William's mother was more polite, turning to her husband and reminding him that this person was, after all, William's benefactor. William's father raised his hand to silence her, declaring that the concept of a benefactor only existed between humans, and as gloom filled the room, he added that a slave was merely a slave. Meanwhile, Ellie had quietly left her seat just as a knock sounded from outside. While William's father grew more aggressive, asking if he hadn't heard the order to leave, Ellie tiptoed toward the door, hoping her brother had returned. The little girl opened the door and asked in a youthful voice who was there, as the light from outside cast a shadow over the figure standing there, who spoke with a freezing tone. The person said they were there to see William and asked if he was home. Ellie looked up at him and hesitantly replied that he had just gone out, asking if the man knew her brother. The man outside stared intensely at the girl with a very dangerous gaze, and immediately afterward, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the doorway into the dining room. Crying out for her mother, Ellie saw Monkey Face and the leader of the nomadic bandits at the door. The leader told Monkey Face that since William wasn't there, they would lure him back to their base. His face was incredibly cold, and every word he spoke sent shivers down one's spine as he ordered to kill the parents and use their blood to leave a message. Monkey Face stepped inside with his sword drawn while the leader stood outside, clutching Ellie's mouth and lifting her up as if she were a mere piece of merchandise. He told her to arrive before the foul liquid from her brother's corpse flowed into the gutter. Ellie was being choked, her tears flowing as she struggled and squirmed incessantly. She screamed loudly for her mother, and William's mother immediately reacted, bolting upright from her seat and rushing outside toward Ellie. William's father also stood up to follow, but suddenly paused with a look of pure shock on his face as Smiling Face, still looking down, let out a soft chuckle. William's father caught sight of that smile, and in the next second, his wife was struck in the chest by Monkey Face's blade and collapsed backward. Seeing this, William's father rushed to her side, crying out for his wife. Monkey Face sniffed the blood on his blade with excitement, glancing at the man and threatening to kill her first and then him. William's father didn't dare move, standing as still as a statue where he was. Smiling Face, who was still sitting at the table, finally turned to stand up with a bright smile on his face, a smile that was completely inappropriate for the current situation. William's father pointed at him in a rage, screaming that this was all his fault and that he should have realized it the moment the boy started smirking. Smiling Face acted as if he hadn't heard the vile insults, reaching out to grab a plate of soup from the table and hurling it at Monkey Face, the dish grazing the father's face before striking the bandit directly. He collapsed, clutching his face in agony, while William's father stood there stunned. Smiley brushed past him and said coldly, "Tend to your wife first." Monkey Face glared ahead, wondering who the hell this person was. Was it William? He recalled knocking on the door earlier when the girl clearly said William wasn't home and had gone out. Monkey Face suddenly remembered Karina's warning that there would be two people at the scene and to watch out for an unexpected individual. He immediately thought of Smiley's words to William's father about tending to his wife and began to deduce the situation in silence. Judging by the way he spoke, this definitely wasn't William. He looked at Smiley, realizing that this man must be the unexpected variable. Monkey Face stood up straight, pointing his sword at Smiley and asking if he was the one hunting them. Smiley didn't answer, but instead lunged forward with incredible speed. Monkey Face counterattacked with a powerful slash, but Smiley dodged it nimbly. The man suddenly faltered, as if he had just realized something. Taking advantage of the missed strike, Smiley kicked Monkey Face squarely in the head. Blood sprayed as the man failed to react in time, and before he could recover, Smiley was already winding up for a follow-up punch. He delivered an upward hook to Monkey Face's chin, sending him reeling backward as the villain struggled to keep his senses and thought to himself. This opponent was dangerous, and he realized he had to get serious. Monkey Face quickly grabbed the hilt of his second sword at his hip, preparing to strike back. He drew the blade with force, using the momentum to slash at Smiley before launching a relentless series of attacks. Seeing the youth evade every strike with ease, Monkey Face wondered what was happening. Had he noticed the second weapon from the start and neutralized it, dodging the subsequent blows as if he knew they were coming? Intimidated by Smiley's aura, he retreated warily, feeling as though the boy could see through every move and was swallowing him whole. Keeping his distance, Monkey Face told himself to stay calm, needing to break the opponent's rhythm first to regain the upper hand. He spun the sword hilts with fluid motions, changing his grip and twirling both blades through the air. He raised one sword high while holding the other horizontally, the blades whistling as they sliced through the air. The rotation speed increased until the screeching sound became deafening, and the two blades eventually became a blur. They spun rapidly, unleashing a barrage of strikes that made Monkey Face appear as if he had multiple arms as he swung towards Smiley. His eyes were locked on Smiley, never expecting he would have to go all out in a place like this, but he couldn't afford any mistakes that might ruin the mission. With that thought, Monkey Face charged, but Smiley remained composed and asked with a grin if that was the sword dance. Stunned, the man halted with a look of disbelief, tightening his grip on his swords as he looked down and asked coldly, "How do you know about this?" Smiley replied with a bright smile that he knew someone who used it. Monkey Face arrogantly claimed that person was likely just a clumsy imitator, as he had trained in the very birthplace of the sword dance, making his the only authentic style. Smiley tilted his head and laughed in rebuttal, stating it was nonsense because the old man at the arena was the true founder of the sword dance. Monkey Face stared back, utterly confused. Unable to believe such a claim, Smiley recalled the founder with a cheerful tone, noting that his sword dance was the pinnacle of swordsmanship and once considered legendary. He even possessed a great deal of information about it. Lucas had been unable to let it go and had brought that legend to the arena at any cost. Monkey Face frowned at Smiley, wondering what he was rambling about regarding the arena and the founder, though the story seemed plausible upon reflection. Seeing him standing still, Smiley provoked him by asking when he would finally attack. This caused Monkey Face to roar in anger, claiming he had already started and only paused because of the boy's nonsense. He mocked Smiley for acting superior despite not knowing the first thing about the sword dance, then lunged forward while unleashing a flurry of slashes. "I will slowly suffocate you. Die in agony amidst this forest of blades." Smiley remained motionless, waiting for Monkey Face to approach. With his usual smile, he slowly raised his hand and told the other he was still too green, a move Monkey Face immediately noticed. He was stunned to see Smiley Face's movements perfectly mirroring his own, as if looking into a glass, though the boy held no sword. Every motion was identical down to the last detail, leaving Monkey Face in utter disbelief at the flawless imitation before him. It was like staring at a reflection, as Smiley Face kindly explained that the core of the sword dance lay in its continuous high-speed curves. His gaze turned cold as he realized these curves were merely a defensive stance for a single strike, recalling the blind founder he had once observed. Despite the inefficiency, the founder had created omnidirectional arcs, techniques that Smiley Face had mastered through his own intuition. By letting the curves suppress the opponent, he focused entirely on pinpointing the enemy's location at that exact moment. Seizing the advantage, Smiley Face grabbed Monkey Face's hand and squeezed hard, forcing him to drop his sword as the curve straightened into a lethal thrust. Leaning in with a terrifying grin, he declared this to be the true sword dance, while Monkey Face stubbornly tried to strike back with his remaining blade. Before he could act, Smiley Face delivered a heavy blow to his chest that shattered his ribs, effectively defeating the man. Trembling uncontrollably in a chokehold, Monkey Face watched as Smiley Face's murderous intent flared, recalling how Lucas had once gathered arena legends for their final battle. "It's always against me," he muttered as bones cracked, though he spared the man's life, leaving him collapsed and coughing violently. Still gripping the man's head, Smiley Face watched as the terrified Monkey Face looked up and desperately threatened him. "That girl dies if I do," he sneered, revealing they had captured Ellie, a revelation that shocked William's father while Smiley Face remained stoic. With a fist hovering before his eyes, the man panicked and confessed that she was at the central sewer, offering to lead the way. Smiley Face ruthlessly twisted the man's arm behind his back until the joints popped, ensuring he couldn't pull any tricks or escape. Smiling, he ordered the man to lead him there, and as they left, William's father watched in a daze, finally offering a sincere apology for his misunderstanding. Without a word, he dragged Monkey Face through a deserted alley, leaving the distraught couple collapsed in the corner. His footsteps echoed clearly as his shadow stretched across the ground, and they soon arrived at the central drainage system. Monkey Face smirked inwardly, gloating that he had intended to lure the boy to their main base all along. Believing he could escape and that the boy was walking to his death, he told him to remember his face well before he died. He didn't realize Smiley Face's expression had turned twisted and cruel, just as William finally arrived back at his home. With a relieved smile, William asked if Happy had been there, and his father recounted everything that happened before Smiley Face left for Ellie. The father recalled his own shock and his whispered apology, to which Smiley Face had simply replied that he was only doing it for William. He drifted into memories of the arena where even his caretaker called him a monster after he defeated 2 hulking men, including the champion, as a child. The champion had stared at him with primal fear, calling him a monster before dying, while Smiley Face watched coldly as his own tears began to fall. Meeting William had changed him, for William saw him as a friend regardless of his nature, bringing genuine smiles and happiness to his life at the farm. Realizing that the world held people who saw him as human, he looked back with a reassuring smile and told them not to worry about the girl. After promising William's parents he would bring her back safely, he departed, leaving William stunned by his father's story. "He just said that and left," William shouted, questioning how things could be fine and why his father hadn't stopped him to call the police. William's eyes were filled with disbelief as his expression darkened, anxiously wondering if things would truly be all right after Happy told him to have faith. His grip on his sword tightened as he rejected his own doubts, covering his face to conceal his moment of vulnerability. This was neither a war nor a competition, but a suicide mission, and William could already envision the peril Smiley was about to face. He imagined the boy being executed before the exiled bandits and wondered if he intended to trade his life, realizing he had to be stopped immediately. With that thought, William bolted away like an arrow, leaving his startled father to shout after him as he replied without looking back that the guards must be alerted to the bandits' arrival. Meanwhile, the guards were mobilizing following reports of an armed man on the road, while their captain remained composed, casually eating a chicken leg. Finding the situation peculiar, the captain listened as a guard confirmed the man was William, while others reported he had eliminated an unidentified group and was now heading home. At that moment, a second-rank knight burst in with an urgent report that the exiled bandits had kidnapped a child from the village. The knight captain slammed his hand on the table and stood up abruptly at the mention of the exiled bandits before bolting outside like a gust of wind. The second-rank knight followed closely, adding that the victim was from William's family and that William was currently heading toward the central sewers. Frowning, the knight captain wondered why the exiled bandits, who had been operating in the shadows for so long, were suddenly acting so brazenly. They had never caused such trouble before, leading him to suspect that this might be a direct response to William's growing reputation. Deducing that the bandits had failed to assassinate the student who was hunting them, the captain realized they had kidnapped William's sister as leverage, imagining the leader's smug expression. Realizing the bandits intended to make an example of William's family, the captain gritted his teeth in fury, cursing himself for not anticipating their move. Anxiety filled him as he calculated the odds, knowing that no matter how skilled one was, there were nearly 100 bandits waiting in the central sewers. Going alone against such a gathering was a death sentence, the captain thought, just as the second-rank knight finally caught up and shouted to him. When the knight offered to head to the farm where bandits had also been reported, the captain's eyes flashed with a hint of suspicion. Questioning why they would divide their forces now, the captain agreed to split up, instructing the knight to finish the task quickly before regrouping. As the knight galloped away with a shout of affirmation, the captain's gaze hardened with resolve, a look mirrored by William himself. While William's face betrayed his deep concern for Smiley, the leader of the exiled bandits waited at the central sewers with mounting excitement. Surrounded by his henchmen, the leader watched as Smiley approached with fearless composure, asking if he was indeed William. As his face became visible in the dim light of the tunnel, it was clear he had already eliminated many of the bandits on his way inside. "Yes, I am William," he replied, while elsewhere, Saga sprinted at full speed and reached out his hand. He struck a nearby guard, knocking his helmet off, and continued running with a loud laugh while the masked Saga shouted back at the confused man. "I'm an exiled bandit, you idiot, and I'm off to raid the farm," he yelled, prompting the guard to immediately report the approach of a dangerous criminal. Another guard picked up the fallen helmet, marveling at the man's speed, just as Saga finally arrived at Winnie's shop. Winnie was neatly arranging herbs on the table, smiling to herself as she prepared to brew some medicine for Happy. She carefully began mixing the ingredients for painkillers and sedatives when her gaze suddenly shifted to the side. Looking at Saga with a puzzled expression, she asked why he had come, while he sat down, coughing and struggling to catch his breath. After explaining that he needed a moment to recover from his full-speed sprint, Winnie began to clarify her question, unaware that Karina had already tracked them down. Her gaze was incredibly cold, as she watched the farm from a distance as if waiting for something, while the scarred man chuckled lewdly. From his high vantage point, he looked down at the scene with ridicule. Ellie was paralyzed with fear, yet the scarred man remained unmoved, mocking the boy for daring to show his face to challenge him. However, Smiling Face curled his lip into a cruel smirk, declaring he had intended to slaughter them all to silence them from the start, before stepping forward boldly to vow he would fight to the death. Everyone watched Smiling Face in silence, each person present gripping their weapons with a high degree of vigilance. Despite the overwhelming odds and the current situation, he charged straight into the crowd, signaling the true beginning of the battle. The men were forced back as Smiling Face's barrage of punches continued, and he relentlessly struck their faces with an expression of pure exhilaration. The scene quickly descended into chaos as the sounds of combat signaled the start of the war, with countless weapons appearing and swinging in ever-increasing numbers. The bandits glared at Smiling Face with predatory eyes, none of them intending to let him go, as they all sought a life-or-death struggle against him. However, a sudden thought crossed his mind that he hadn't come here to compete, causing Smiling Face's hand to momentarily falter as he gripped his dagger. This reaction caught the scarred man's attention, but Smiling Face's eyes remained full of confidence as he vowed that he would certainly save her. Ellie felt a sense of relief upon hearing his words, and when the scarred man attempted a surprise attack, Smiling Face nimbly dodged out of the way. Smiling Face suddenly leaped back before pouring all his strength into an attack that left the bandits below continuously wounded. Suddenly, an irritated bandit shoved his comrade aside to confront him, but his expression turned to one of pure shock just a second later. It was because Smiling Face had charged forward with a sword held firmly in his grip, and his sudden appearance threw the bandits into a state of total confusion. He unleashed a frantic barrage of attacks upon them before suddenly curling his body and leaping high into the air, using a man behind him as a shield to evade an incoming strike from the front. He gripped a bandit's shoulder tightly and took down two men with a single fluid motion, and even as two more seized the chance to strike, Smiling Face pressed his assault without fear. Suddenly, Smiling Face bit down on the man's hand and used that opening to channel power into his own arm, concentrating all his strength into a final blow. Another man was struck down, and the nearby bandits began to tremble with fear as Smiling Face continued to eliminate them one by one. He appeared like a demon in their eyes as he dispatched one bandit after another, the body count rising without pause. The scarred man grew anxious as he realized the bastard was intentionally avoiding vital points, deducing the strategy behind the current situation. He was using the wounded as human shields, forcing the bandits to soften their strikes out of fear that their blades would hit their own comrades. Smiling Face told himself not to be too heavy-handed as he took careful steps toward Ellie, believing that step by step he could finally rescue her. However, the scarred man shouted for his subordinates to ignore the casualties and keep attacking until the boy was dead. But the subsequent screams of agony proved Smiling Face's success, leaving the leader stunned. The bandits glared at their leader with resentment while the scarred man stood dazed in disbelief, unable to accept how they were losing despite their superior numbers, the hostage, and the home field advantage. He was horrified by the bloody scene, wondering why that bastard held all the cards when they should have had the initiative, before suddenly remembering something and glancing at Ellie cowering in the corner. Having devised a plan, the scarred man picked up a crossbow and aimed it directly at the girl, an intention that Smiling Face immediately noticed. Remaining calm, he declared that if the boy wanted to see blood, he would provide it, prompting Smiling Face to drop his sword and rush toward Ellie, much to the villain's smug delight as he muttered that it was too late. The bolt was released, and by the time Smiling Face reached her, it was already too late, leaving him staring in wide-eyed disbelief at the sight before him. It turned out that William had appeared out of nowhere to shield Ellie in his arms, leaving Smiling Face dazed as he uttered the man's name before acting without a second thought. He lunged toward the rampart and reached out to grab the scarred man's ankle, and before the confused villain could react, he was dragged down from his perch. The scarred man was caught off guard and fell painfully to the ground as Happy slowly approached him. He smirked and told William to retreat, leaving the scarred man stunned as he finally realized that the boy was William. William had arrived while Happy was fighting, executing a perfect plan to rescue Ellie while the bandits were focused on Happy. William apologized to Happy while Ellie softly called for her brother, but Happy continued his relentless advance. He told William to cover her eyes and trust him, then vanished from sight the moment he finished speaking. Happy charged forward like a man possessed, while William could only stand by and watch despite his desperate urge to help. He shielded Ellie's eyes from the carnage, as Happy's actions had transcended the limits of a normal battle during the intense fight. From the shadows, the scarred man raised his crossbow and took careful aim at Happy. Suddenly, the scarred man's eyes widened in shock, appearing completely bewildered by what he saw. Happy dodged every shot perfectly while fighting, appearing to the man like a multi-eyed demon with eyes all over his body. William remained hidden to protect Ellie, feeling utterly amazed because he had previously thought Happy was merely a capable fighter. He felt a surge of uncertainty and began to wonder just how powerful Happy truly was. That question was answered as Happy took on the entire group alone, a feat that William found hard to believe. It seemed no one could best Happy, leaving the scarred man with the crossbow to question if his opponent was even human. He fired a decisive shot, but Happy anticipated it, dropped his sword, and pulled a nearby bandit in front of him as a shield. A scream of pain erupted, causing everyone to look as the leader dropped his weapon and charged forward with great speed. The scarred man rushed past his subordinates, cast aside his cloak, and drew 2 daggers while ordering his men to retreat. He launched a frenzied assault on Happy, striking with a desperate and maddened intensity. Happy did not flinch and met the attack head-on, kicking the man back before landing a blow to his chest. The scarred man retreated to keep his distance, while Happy seemed quite satisfied with the turn of events. He easily parried a heavy strike and used his full strength to suppress the man as they clashed as equals. Neither side would back down, but the scarred man briefly gained the upper hand until his eyes suddenly widened in surprise. Despite Happy's smugness, the scarred man was forced to dodge a swift blade and lunged forward to continue the fight. Refusing to let it end here, the scarred man lunged forward with a crimson face, shouting that his revenge had only just begun. He screamed about being treated like discarded trash before landing a kick that sent Happy reeling backward. He expressed bitter regret for wasting his life as a puppet for fools, but Happy remained undaunted despite the setback. With familiar arena imagery in mind, Happy analyzed his foe, seeing a man consumed by hatred for the world that broke him. He remembered the champion asking, "Happy, do you resent the parents who gave you life?" as he gently patted the boy's head. The champion had warned him never to live in hatred, and seeing the scarred man now, Happy finally understood those old words. His eyes bulged in terror as Happy plunged a blade through his abdomen, for the conclusion in the arena is always the same. He gasped for air through the agonizing pain. As Happy Face lowered his blade, the scarred man collapsed to the ground. It began with blood and ended in blood, a scene William witnessed clearly from his vantage point. "We won!" He stood up, trembling with excitement. "We won!" William shouted repeatedly in a frenzy, celebrating Happy's victory over the exiled bandits. Facing a dire situation, the bandits fled in terror. "Run! We have to leave now. The kingdom's knights are approaching." William called out cautiously in a low voice, "Happy." When Happy Face didn't respond, he tried calling out once more, "Happy." Since he remained silent, William shouted his name in frustration, "Happy." In response, Happy Face simply offered a bright, radiant smile. "You're injured. I have plenty of medicine at home. Let's go back now. The mistress will apply it and you'll be fine." William stared at him in silence. He seemed to have something to say but held back. Finally, he relented and agreed, "Fine, let's head back. The soldiers have likely arrived by now." In reality. Meanwhile, the knight captain was en route when he noticed something strange. "What is this? Why is the path so clear?" he wondered suspiciously. Did the guards get here first? However, the knight captain froze at the sight before him. Seeing Happy Face lying on the ground, he thought in shock, "Happy Face? Why is he here?" The knight captain also noticed the bodies scattered all around. No, it was more than that. Why were all the exiled bandits lying there defeated? Happy Face's actions that day became legendary. In that moment, the exiled bandits had been vanquished by a single man. What a relief, hey. From then on, they no longer ran rampant. Though some remained scattered, they were completely weakened without their leader. Yet the truth was quite ironic. The event was distorted by an overzealous soldier. That man was somewhat confused by the scene, seeing only William standing alone amidst the fallen crowd. William wiped out the entire exiled bandit gang by himself, a true hero of our time. Thus, the story began to spread among the knights. "That guy is a bounty hunter." "Really? I heard it clearly at the tavern." "That academy student?" Even at the academy, people asked, "Have you heard about William?" And it didn't stop there. The news continued to spread at a breakneck pace. At the market, people were amazed. Then, things escalated even further until the news reached the king's ears. Just like that, William's name spread rapidly even before the investigation report was filed. However, in another place, before the rumors even began. This was the moment right after the battle ended. Happy Face was returning home full of joy, running back toward the farm. Although his body was exhausted, his spirit remained exhilarated. Despite his fatigue and hazy mind, he kept running. At that same time, in a side story, the scarred man sat dazed in his cell. That brat who used to do the knight's dirty work. Is he really the kingdom's knight captain now? The knight captain fell silent upon hearing this. After a long pause, he replied with a choked voice, "Before you were exiled and joined the rebels, I held great respect for you. Who would have thought a war hero would be exiled and become a rebel king?" At the mention of this, the scarred man spoke with resentment. It was all because of him. The knight captain began to speculate. The one who single-handedly slaughtered an entire company 20 years ago as they returned from victory. He didn't hesitate to admit it. "Yes, I was lucky enough to survive and escape." Filled with rage, the scarred man added, "I remember it as if it were yesterday." The scene played out clearly in his mind. A man holding an infant in his arms while slaughtering the entire unit. The only reason was that the army had blocked his path. Back then, no one would listen to the truth from him. The king was furious, claiming I made up stories like a fool before exiling me. He was gradually shunned and severely insulted by everyone, becoming the disgrace of the Night Order. He was the laughingstock of every tavern. They constantly mocked him as a coward, a traitor, a runaway, and a madman, stripping him of all honor. "What the hell?" They laughed and cursed at me until I lost everything. Happy Face reminded him of that past scene. Now that monster had reappeared, looking exactly like him. The scarred man didn't hesitate to challenge the knight captain directly. "This time, why don't you try reporting it to the king? Tell him that a man without a weapon wiped out an entire bandit gang. See if you're treated like a fool and exiled too." After hearing this, the captain remained silent. With a hint of sorrow, he added, "And I also want to know the identity of that monster." Upon hearing this, the knight captain departed, not forgetting to make a promise. "I will investigate," he said, suddenly halting his steps before the captain delivered unexpected news to the scarred man. Noting that no one had died as the assailant had seemingly planned to only inflict serious wounds. He was filled with doubt upon hearing this, furrowing his brows as if to interrogate the man. If it were truly a monster, there would have been no reason for such restraint. One kills to achieve a goal, much like how you once intended to shoot that child. The knight captain remarked composedly before taking his leave. "The only monster here is you." By the time Happy returned, he collapsed from exhaustion, yet he wore an unusually relieved smile as he gazed at the scene before him. In that moment, Happy seemed to be the most joyful person alive until, after an unknown amount of time, the champion's voice rang out, urging him to wake up and breathe as the boy squinted at the man before him. He was meticulously bandaging each of the boy's injuries, lamenting that the wounds were far too deep and that the opponent had been beyond his capabilities, just as he had warned. Despite the pain, Happy remained silent until he suddenly burst into laughter, finally beginning to grasp the true nature of the arena. "No, I must become stronger at any cost," he declared, while the champion asked with a voice full of heartache why he was so obsessed with facing such powerful adversaries. "Acting this way will only heighten Lucas's expectations of you," the champion warned, causing Happy to fall silent as the man's figure began to fade, reminding him of the constant fear of his father vanishing forever. The tragic end of his father's life flashed through Happy's mind, lying motionless with a blade through his chest, while villains refused to show mercy, eventually tossing the champion into a deep pit to vanish forever, sparking a firm resolve within the boy. "I won't let that happen. I'll face everything so my father never suffers again," Happy vowed, laughing heartily once more and leaving the champion feeling somewhat bewildered by his reaction. Happy's hand trembled as he gripped the man's, confessing his hatred of being alone since his father was his only kin. He couldn't help but recall his father's cold hand, realizing that the warmth he felt was his entire world. Though the champion's tragedy made Happy laugh, his heart was filled with agony. As he charged forward, the guards grew alert and drew their swords to block his path, shouting for him to halt. However, he easily incapacitated them with a single strike, prompting the other guards to give chase and cry out for his capture. Ultimately, Happy managed to burst inside, where Winnie and the others stared at him with bewildered expressions. Just then, a guard entered to drag Happy away, but before she could even process the situation, Winnie cried out his name in confusion and told the guard to get back. Ignoring everyone around her, Winnie rushed forward to embrace Happy tightly, and being held by such a beauty only made him look even more delighted. Winnie stroked Happy's head while offering constant words of comfort, assuring him that everything was fine and that there was nothing to worry about. Seeing this, the second-rank knight signaled the guards behind him to retreat, while Happy raised his hand as if trying to reach for something. He seemed to be concealing something, his eyes filled with longing as he told himself not to be sad, for one day his world would return. Meanwhile, tears streamed down his cheeks and fell to the ground. Happy didn't care and simply let his tears fall as the two of them stood there together, bathed in the beautiful sunlight. Sometime later, a candle flickered before being blown out, and the owners stood kindly at the door, telling Happy to get some rest. Meanwhile, the second-rank knight prepared his belongings for the carriage, noting that despite the reports, no exiled bandits were found. He ordered the guards to stay on patrol while they headed back, just as an injured Saga lay restlessly upon a tree branch. He gazed up at the sky, wishing that the slave's death would ensure the farm's safety, though a different thought crossed Saga's mind a moment later. Yet he found the idea of the man's actual death difficult to accept, especially as he recalled Winnie embracing Happy and realized how much she truly cared for him. Saga felt certain that the exiled bandit was too severely injured to ever return, yet he still found himself beginning to hesitate. He wondered if he should wait until the end of the patrol shift. In the dark of night, amidst the low sounds of the animals and the gloomy atmosphere, a sudden noise shattered the silence. Saga quickly took notice of a guard carrying a torch below, who scolded him, reminding him that he had been told not to act on his own. He remained silent as the other man spoke, stating that their objective was to assassinate the royalty rather than save people, while the red-eyed man warned him of the consequences of another mistake. "You will be purged," he declared before quickly departing, leaving Saga alone on the branch, feeling utterly conflicted. The night remained unchanged for a long while until the sunlight finally began to peek through, signaling the arrival of a new day. Early that morning, a messenger arrived with the king's decree to read the orders to William, while another official approached Happy Face with the same command. Both were ordered to report to the royal capital immediately to appear before the king. As their carriage moved through the curious gazes of the crowd, the news of their victory over the exiled bandits had spread so far that even the porter was being summoned to the luxurious chambers of the court. William sat while an attendant adjusted his fine clothing, eventually patting his shoulder and assuring him that the attire was perfectly suitable. He told William that the king would grant him the title of knight, and he only needed to kneel and accept the honor that would make him a celebrated hero. William lowered his head and whispered that he was not worthy, causing the others to look at him in confusion, as he admitted he wasn't the one who defeated the bandits. He confessed that the victory belonged to Happy, who was summoned alongside him, while he had spent the entire time running and hiding. The man who addressed him smirked and leaned in close, whispering that the king was already fully aware of the truth before he made his decision. He explained that an illiterate slave becoming a knight would shame the kingdom, so the king would free him and make him an apprentice first to keep him under observation. Fortunately, the entire kingdom was already praising William as a reliable hero, celebrating the story of a top student from a prestigious academy becoming a knight. He warned William to keep this a secret before departing, leaving the young man alone in the room to bite his lip in silence. Later, William knelt in the grand hall as the king placed a cold steel blade against his neck and solemnly declared that he had uprooted evil for the kingdom. The king dubbed him a knight while the crowds outside chanted his name, adding that the slave who accompanied him would join the order as an apprentice to support him. He glanced meaningfully at Happy Face, who was kneeling nearby, and said he looked forward to their achievements as the ceremony ended. As the two returned to their room, maids giggled and whispered about how handsome William was, but he only bowed his head in deep regret. He apologized to Happy, admitting that he had handled the bounty carelessly and put everyone in a very dangerous position. Happy Face comforted him, saying that everything worked out because of him and that he would have been lost if he had been alone. He confessed that he was still too immature to understand situations as quickly as William, recalling how he knew nothing of the bandits or the dangers of the road. He recalled how he stood there in confusion when his family was attacked and his sister was kidnapped, not even knowing who to call for help as he ran blindly. Happy Face smiled and called himself a mere fighter who would have lost everyone without William, whom he considered one of the strongest people he had met. He praised William's unwavering decisiveness, noting that such strength came from more than just muscles, and said he was learning a lot from him. William was stunned by those words before smiling to himself, certain that they would eventually become the most dependable of friends. He vowed that he would never run or hide from this friend again, clenching his fist with a firm and steady sense of determination. He told Happy that since the situation was irreversible, he wanted to live an authentic life from now on rather than continuing a lie. He offered to teach Happy everything he knew if Happy would teach him how to become stronger in return, causing the other to smile brightly. Happy Face agreed to share all of his knowledge, and William suggested they visit the night order before heading home. Happy Face quickly agreed, and as they arrived at the night order, Pion's loud voice drew everyone's attention as he addressed William. He argued that a man who was a slave just an hour ago could not be their equal, refusing to accept such an unprecedented situation. He angrily hurled a wooden sword at Happy Face's feet, and pointed a finger in contempt, vowing to prove the man was unworthy as William stepped in to stop him. "Stop, this is His Majesty's decree. We have no choice." He let out a mocking laugh. "William, are you really yielding to such a lowlife? While the blood from the battle with the exiled bandits has yet to dry, you remain a noble knight and a true hero, but you are nothing of the sort. You uneducated piece of trash, stop being so ridiculous." William felt helpless. "You lunatic, stop this at once or you'll be killed. I anticipated some resistance, but this is going too far." Seeing William's flustered reaction, Faye's confidence only grew. "I am now certain that this worthless slave is merely a parasite, using William to climb his way up here. I will show you how unworthy you are so you'll withdraw on your own." Amidst the tension, Happy calmly spoke up, saying he understood the situation. "Don't worry, William. This will be over soon." Before long, the two stood facing each other on the training grounds. Happy gripped his sword hilt and pointed the tip toward the ground as a signal. "Let's begin." Observing his movements, the crowd below burst into contemptuous laughter, mocking his stance and his inability to even hold a sword properly. "Look at your posture proves you've never studied swordsmanship." Opposite him, Finn held his blade with perfect form and warned that Happy clearly didn't grasp the situation, adding that this wouldn't be a fair fight as he'd expose his lack of skill. He intended to show what happens when someone without status tries to become a knight, threatening to crush Happy's head and strike his jaw. He launched a sudden assault, but Happy managed to parry the blow. Finn smirked provocatively, asking if he felt the difference, claiming this was the true sword of a knight while a slave like him only knew the lash of a whip. He told Happy to consider it an honor to be struck by a knight's blade as he continued swinging, each slash whistling through the air of the vast training ground. Their figures moved incessantly, darting back and forth like the wind. Finn delivered a horizontal slash just beneath Happy's arm, mocking him for being too slow. Surrounding knights cheered, urging him to crush his opponent. Meanwhile, William watched with eyes full of concern for Happy. However, seeing Happy's smiling, enjoying expression left William speechless, wondering if he was just pretending again. Finn, however, remained completely oblivious. Finn continued swinging wildly, demanding the trash kneel and apologize. Suddenly, Happy's eyes widened as he released his sword and leaped forward. Before Finn could react, Happy lunged and delivered a powerful punch to his stomach. Finn collapsed, trembling, as the onlookers watched in stunned silence. Agony surged through his body, leaving him curled in pain. The crowd finally reacted with jeers, questioning why a knight would discard his sword to fight barehanded. They mocked him for fighting like it was a tavern brawl, claiming he would have been sliced to pieces if real swords were used. William inwardly scoffed at the idea of Happy being cut down. It was actually a one-sided performance, as Happy had parried every single attack. Furthermore, choosing to use his fists instead of a blade was an act of mercy toward his opponent. Had a real weapon been used, Finn would already be dead. Trembling, Finn bit his lip, realizing he had never experienced such intense pain before. That single punch hurt more than an entire year of training combined, filling him with dread. He looked up at Happy, who seemed surrounded by a sinister aura directed straight at him. Happy picked up his sword and approached, advising Finn not to fear, for surrendering to pain would mean losing a winnable match when he had come there to victory. He told Finn to endure it, leaving the knight wide-eyed and confused, as his previous lessons were nothing like this reality. He scoffed at the idea of being lectured by a mere apprentice. Finn couldn't believe a slave was trying to teach him. Suddenly, Happy gripped his sword and charged, saying he would show him. Finn had barely managed to stand and was still dazed when the next moment occurred. Wooden sword snapped in two and flew into the air, leaving the surrounding knights speechless and agape. At that exact moment, the commander of the Royal Knights suddenly appeared. He shouted, demanding to know what those fools were doing. Finn was currently trembling as Happy held the broken wooden blade to his throat. The commander approached them irritably to interrogate them. He asked why Finn was bullying them when he had ordered them to be brought to his room. He reminded them that he had personally recruited them and told Finn to take any issues up with him. He asked if Finn was that dissatisfied with him. Finn's face turned pale with fear as he stood at attention and denied it, followed by the others who shouted their denials in unison. They all cried out, "No, sir." The commander's lips twitched as he ordered them to disperse, and the crowd immediately scrambled away in a hurry. Only 3 people remained on the training grounds as a brief silence fell. After a few moments, he turned to them and promised they wouldn't have to deal with such people again, explaining they weren't chosen for knightly duties. Instead, they were to serve as the face of the kingdom. There wouldn't be much training or many missions. They only needed to learn etiquette and appear at royal events. William frowned, realizing they were mere puppets and fearing Happy would be looked down upon for his status. He then asked if he could at least quietly observe the training sessions, causing the commander to knit his brows in confusion. The commander asked why, noting that no one would complain, but William explained that living a lie would eventually require him to prove himself, and he didn't want to blame himself for being powerless when that time came. He stated he no longer wanted to flee or feel ashamed, vowing to become someone whom neither the pen nor the sword could break. Hearing this, the commander furrowed his brow in a headache. The king had set up a fake, yet a real one had appeared. The commander glanced at Happy and asked if he felt the same way, to which Happy replied with a smile that he did. We decided to grow stronger together. He was momentarily stunned, unsure of what to say as his gaze wavered, recalling the events of a few days ago. Knight Commander looked at the reports in surprise, realizing that Smiling Face was a slave raised by Lucaston since childhood, to which the knight beside him replied. No, more accurately, he was raised by the gladiators in Lucaston's arena. I investigated the roster and found that while recent fighters are just criminals, the previous ones were absurdly powerful. Back then, frequent wars filled the arena with general-level prisoners and defeated soldiers, and he learned to survive among such formidable warriors. This means he is the strongest of the strong. That is all the information for today, as I was delayed by many tasks. The Knight Commander rubbed his chin while reading, thinking that if Lucaston were still alive, he could have asked him about Smiling Face directly. Only Smiling Face's records are marked as unknown, with notes suggesting further investigation is needed, as there seems to be more data on this mysterious individual, the reporter added. Lucaston's territory spanned many different regions, and since he was a world traveler, we might find more data if we retrace his steps. However, a verdict has already been reached regarding him, and further investigation is unrelated to the Knight Order's current operations. Is there a specific reason for this inquiry? He fell silent, then admitted he wasn't certain but suspected a connection to an event he knew of. The dates and locations in the ledger coincide strangely with that event. Returning to the present, the Knight Commander watched Smiling Face, thinking that since the investigation would proceed eventually, he only needed to observe for now. But before that, I have a feeling these guys will cause more trouble. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. The growth of one and the skills of the other are truly worth anticipating. Thanks to them, my own will, which had cooled since becoming commander, is boiling again as my body begins to awaken. After some thought, he made a decision, stating that he would ensure the boy could observe freely for now before deciding on the next course of action. The scene shifts to the humble cottage where Smiling Face lives. He happily shows off his certificate to his grandparents, announcing he has become an apprentice knight, then asks where Winnie went. Winnie's grandfather says she is at work while the grandmother reads the paper, murmuring about his emancipation and free citizenship. He then pulls out a large bag, offering his entire reward to his grandfather. Winnie's grandfather clutches the bag of money happily, asking if it's really all for him, while the grandmother marvels at how he surprises her every day. After handing over the items, Smiling Face politely asks to go train with William. The grandmother agrees, noting that as a free man, he no longer needs to do chores, so he happily runs off, promising to work when he returns. The grandfather waves cheerfully, praising him as a true grandson, while the grandmother remarks on how fast children grow, to which the grandfather responds brightly. He isn't just a child, he is a blessing. Meanwhile, Smiling Face reunites with William, humming as they head back to watch the training session. The Knight Order's training grounds, the apprentices are practicing hard. Smiling Face points and whispers to William, advising him to observe the most skilled trainee first. Instead of watching the sword arm, focus on how he judges distance and shifts his center of gravity. Things only felt through movement, but William interrupts, saying he understands and is focusing on the center of gravity first. Then comes the swing. His stance is definitely unique, being half a beat faster in timing even if their speeds are identical. Because his timing is different, he always holds the advantage. Smiling Face can't help but admire William's excellent powers of observation and analysis. This will greatly aid your growth. Once your wounds heal, we will try everything, but for now, just observe as much as possible, and William nods in agreement. With a hawk-like gaze fixed on the knight, he constantly mutters about analysis, making the subject of his scrutiny break into a nervous sweat. As expected, the hero's gaze is truly distinct, as he identified the top student in an instant. Later, the two sit in the library as William provides guidance. This letter is read as A, and Smiling Face follows along. William then smiles and asks him to guess a sentence, which he reads perfectly. True courage lies not in the sword, but in a heart that chooses justice. William is surprised and asks how he knew, to which Smiling Face happily explains that he deduced it based on what was just said and the flow of the sentence. As they move outside, Smiling Face looks at the light and exclaims that since the sun is in that direction, It must be west, meaning it is already past noon. At another location, they seem to be studying math. With 3 loaves a day for 400 people over a 20-day journey, they calculate that 24,000 loaves are needed. What is the next line? William asked, filled with doubt. Was Smiley a bookworm? Furthermore, the basic knowledge he thought the boy lacked was actually quite solid. Smiley applied it himself and learned very quickly. Seeing him dazed, William called out softly. William's voice startled him, and the man smiled as he gave a reminder. I think that's enough for today. It's late, so I'll see you tomorrow. Smiley was initially confused by the suggestion. He then looked up at the sky and realized the moon had already risen. He cried out in a panic. Good heavens, when did it get so dark? See you tomorrow, William. That was truly fun, he said before running back quickly. William watched his retreating figure and nodded slightly. Me too, he whispered, clutching the book in his hand with determination. I won't let myself be left too far behind. Chapter 20. Winnie looked up and blurted out, It's already dark. She tilted her head and rubbed her neck, muttering a complaint about how dangerous the roads were at night. I suppose I'll have to sleep at the pharmacy again today. It's always like this, Winnie thought, her eyes wandering as she became lost in her reflections. She wondered how Smiley's audience with the king went, as 3 days had already passed. She looked up and let out a heavy sigh, feeling the weight of being unable to go home because of work. What is this? I just want to go home quickly. A sudden knock at the door startled Winnie, and she turned toward the source of the sound. She approached the door and announced, We're closed. Smiley pushed the door open and replied cheerfully, It's me. He stood before Winnie with a bright smile and delivered the news. I'm here to pick you up. Let's go home. As they walked through the night streets, she asked if the old man had sent him. Holding a torch, Smiley answered truthfully, yes. He glanced at her and added, He said today is a happy day, so I should bring you home for a meal. Winnie paused, her face clouded with confusion. A happy day. She immediately leaned in close to Smiley, excitedly guessing. Don't tell me there was good news that day. I'm so curious. What happened? He didn't hide it and replied immediately. The king recognized me as a free citizen and appointed me as an apprentice knight. Winnie covered her mouth in shock. What, that's an incredible promotion. No wonder he called for us so urgently. She flashed a radiant smile and suggested, Oh my, I must do something for you as well. Smiley spoke sincerely. Seeing everyone happy makes me happy too. Winnie looked him in the face and guessed. Of course it's happy news. Your grandmother must be thrilled. Smiley looked up and relayed her words. Yes, she is very happy. She said everything has settled well. From now on, only good things will happen. He then narrowed his eyes slightly, his expression brimming with joy. A moment later, Smiley reminded her caringly, Winnie, don't overwork yourself anymore. I will always protect you from now on. Winnie didn't answer immediately but remained silent, quietly watching Smiley's sturdy back. Winnie suddenly closed her eyes and placed a hand gently on him. Smiley was somewhat puzzled by her gesture. Feeling a surge of warmth and shyness, she said, Thank you. This is the first time in my life I've looked forward to something like this. He said nothing, only glancing back at her. Winnie raised her arm to wipe away her tears and asked, By the way, are you still taking your medicine regularly? Smiley kept his gaze fixed ahead. Without turning back to see her fragile state, he replied, Yes, I'm sleeping better and feeling stronger. Winnie's cheerful voice rang out through the night. That's wonderful, he replied, Yes. When they reached the farm, the long-haired old man appeared and waved enthusiastically. Winnie is here. She stared in stunned silence, her eyes wide. Confused, Winnie asked, What is all this, Grandpa? He answered calmly, It's a celebration party. She remained bewildered. I mean, why is it at our farm? The scavenger old man suddenly approached and remarked, Old man, haven't you overexerted yourself? The long-haired elder waved back. The gravedigger is here. Saga approached Smiley and shook his hand. First time meeting you. Congratulations on joining the Knights. He took Saga's hand and replied, Thank you. A bead of sweat rolled down Winnie's face as she placed a hand on the elder's shoulder and asked hesitantly, I thought you said it was just a family dinner. Exactly how many people did you invite? He responded with unabashed enthusiasm. I invited everyone. The farm was bustling with people chatting. We're having a party. Can you lend a hand? It's nothing. He's our grandson after all. The long-haired elder listed the guests he had invited. From the butcher shop and the fruit stall to the blacksmith, everyone was there. Winnie looked at the crowd in confusion. Where did you get the money? He answered nonchalantly. I used up all the reward money. Her eyes widened in pure bewilderment. What reward money? Standing behind her, Smiley explained. It's what I received when I was appointed as an apprentice knight. After a moment, Winnie realized the truth and screamed at the top of her lungs. So this is all Smiley's money? The long-haired elder held up a wine cup and joined the festivities. The scent of money had intoxicated him. The man in the scarf laughed heartily and hugged the elder's leg, making an excited suggestion. Old man, give us a speech. The long-haired, white-bearded elder laughed heartily in his drunken state. Standing atop the hands of 2 men, he spread his arms wide and called out to the crowd. To Zyro Lion, you shall become a knight of the kingdom. Cheers! Zyro Lion stood to the side, clapping happily and immersing himself in the festive atmosphere. It was so joyful. The night sky blazed with countless shimmering stars. Winnie watched him as he was surrounded by people offering their congratulations and thanks. The long-haired elder rested his hand on the table and called out, "Winnie!" She leaned her chin on her hand and replied listlessly, "Yes." The old man gazed at Zyro Lion's distant figure and spoke contemplatively. Even though he is now a free man, the fact that Zyro Lion was once a slave will never change. The white-haired elder lowered his eyes and continued, "It will follow him like a shadow. Some in this kingdom will refuse to acknowledge him and will even look down on him." He turned to Winnie and explained warmly, "That is why I want everyone to remember that Zyro Lion is our family. Anyone who insults him insults our entire family." The white-haired elder recalled a specific moment. Zyro Lion, covered in wounds, had walked with trembling steps. "He has already shown how much he cares for us." Then the old man's gaze turned uncertain. Along with the white-haired old woman and Winnie, they looked toward him. "We must also show him how we feel, which is why we held this celebration." Realizing the truth, she whispered, "Why didn't you just say so from the start?" The elder did not answer Winnie, his eyes fixed on Zyro Lion as he added, "And above all, we must let Zyro Lion experience what it truly means to share a life together." An image of him awkwardly scratching the back of his neck while talking to others appeared. A gentle smile unconsciously graced Winnie's lips. William approached Zyro Lion and called out his name. Seeing William, he enthusiastically pointed toward the feast and suggested, "William, there's so much delicious food over there, let's eat together." William's father frowned and hesitated. He had been standing before Zyro Lion, feeling instinctively intimidated. A moment later, William's father placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head in a sincere apology. "I wish to truly apologize for my recent rudeness and foul language. Only after owing my family's lives to you did I realize how foolish my actions were. I am deeply sorry." Zyro Lion watched him silently for a moment. He narrowed his eyes slightly and reached out his hand, saying, "It's all right. I never hated you." Standing behind them, William watched the exchange between Zyro Lion and his father with a gentle smile. Lion approached him and offered a hand-embroidered handkerchief with heartfelt gratitude. "Big brother, this is a gift for you. I embroidered it myself. Thank you for saving me." Zyro Lion leaned down eagerly to accept it, saying, "Thank you." Suddenly, the white-haired elder, clutching a cup of wine, ran over and pulled William's father into the party. "Everyone, come inside. Let's raise our glasses." The old scavenger looked toward his table and muttered, "After eating this, I'll probably have to go dig my own grave." He spoke in a dissatisfied, grumbling tone. "I can't stand looking at that old man." The scavenger raised his wine cup and made a promise to Saga. "Saga, if you achieve something great, I'll throw a massive party for you too. Youth should taste success at least once." After speaking, he walked away with a sigh. "Good grief, the wine is all gone. Let me get some more." Saga remained silent, his gaze fixed downward in deep thought. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appeared behind him and coldly reminded him, "Saga, the date has been set." Saga felt as though he were being pulled away from the lively party, falling into a grim silence. "In 2 months, at the kingdom's night order competition, when everyone is gathered." The mysterious man's eyes gleamed dangerously as he grinned. That would be the day they assassinated the king. On the arena grounds, 2 knights pointed their swords at each other in a tense standoff. It was the night order's training ceremony, with crowds gathered around to watch the ongoing match. No one could take their eyes off the fierce battle unfolding in the arena. A row of knights stood in formation, raising their swords high. Every year, the top 10 official knights were honored. Elsewhere, the apprentice knights placed their hands over their hearts with burning determination, as the top 10 apprentices were chosen for the sparring matches. A blonde youth clashed swords with a black-haired opponent. For the apprentices, it was a great honor to test their skills against official knights. The king sat with his chin resting on his hand, observing the matches below. If one performed well during these bouts, it was the fastest path to becoming an official knight. Consequently, the competition among the apprentices was incredibly fierce. Zyro Lion stood with his hands on his hips, focused on reading the rules posted on the board, which seemed to be about the selection process. Brown-haired youth suddenly appeared, reaching toward him and calling out, "Hey, you idiot." He crossed his arms and looked away, mocking him. "Do you think an illiterate person like you can suddenly read just by staring?" Then he glanced at Zyro Lion and arrogantly demanded, "Give up on the selection trials. My family is the noble house that invested the most in this year's examination." He tilted his head back, boasting haughtily about his family's financial backing for the event. "The arena management, equipment, meals, and prize money are all organized by my family." The brown-haired youth puffed out his chest and declared confidently, "In other words, this is my playground." Before he could react, the other youth changed his tone, thumping his chest with a mocking smirk. remarking how unpleasant it would be to have a filthy slave on that stage. The atmosphere around Mayan grew heavy as he glared at the brown-haired boy. He clenched his fists, thinking of the other family's members who added that it wasn't just his clan, but all the apprentices' families shared the same view. You'd better know your place, damn it. The brown-haired youth suddenly approached Finn and rambled on. Right, I'm not in your squad, so I haven't seen it myself, but I've heard everything. They say when he sparred with you, you beat him like a dog. He imagined the fight and exclaimed with excitement and contempt. He could only take hits repeatedly. Then in a fit of rage, he somehow managed to land a single punch. Brown-haired youth closed his eyes and made a regretful gesture, remarking that he was no different from a toddler. Mayan calmly responded after the long tirade. I didn't originally intend to participate, but hearing you say that makes me want to join now. The brown-haired youth's face stiffened as he snapped back. What? He quickly regained his smug demeanor. The brown-haired youth turned to leave, waving his hand dismissively while shouting back a mockery. Regardless, that opportunity will never come to you. Someone like you won't even qualify for the exam. Mayan silently watched the group as they erupted in laughter. William held the paper and read the contents to him. For the first time in the selection evaluation, a knowledge test would be added to the combat trials. Mayan asked curiously, "What is that?" He looked up at Mayan and explained that they would be testing their level of understanding before the selection evaluation. William somberly offered his assessment. In my opinion, the family hosting this exam intends to eliminate Mayan. Elsewhere, the brown-haired youth approached the blonde youth with a paper and ordered, "Hey, come here." The latter asked in confusion, "What is this?" He smirked and replied nonchalantly, "The answers to this knowledge test." The blonde youth raised an eyebrow and flatly refused, saying he didn't need such a thing. Brown-haired youth rolled his eyes and began to provoke him. "I knew it. You're always rank 1, but if you get even a single question wrong this time, then your top spot will be stolen. Are you okay with that? It would be a stain on your family's reputation." His words caused the blonde youth to waver, his brow furrowing. He quickly snatched the answer sheet, and the brown-haired youth watched with satisfaction. He threw an arm around the blonde youth's shoulder and added cheerfully, "That's more like it. Wouldn't it be a beautiful sight if all the allied families took the top spot? Let's create that masterpiece together." Elsewhere, Mayan remarked with excitement, "I really didn't plan on participating, but you kept talking about it, so now I want to join too." William lowered his gaze, staring thoughtfully at the paper in his hand. After a moment, he made a suggestion. "Then why not try?" William also didn't forget to mention a difficult problem to Mayan. Of course, the gap in study time compared to the other apprentices puts you at a severe disadvantage. Even using all the remaining time this week wouldn't be enough. He looked Mayan straight in the eye and said firmly, "But this is a test where they underestimate you, and the examiner's intentions are clear. I think I can predict some of the exam questions." Mayan was puzzled by William's words and asked, "Is that possible?" He recalled the moments he spent explaining things in the classroom. In university, I was always top of the class not just because I studied hard, but because I could predict the examiner's intent. William lowered his head and continued in a deep voice, "With some luck, if my predictions are correct, you can still pass. The chances are slim." He looked at Mayan and added, "That possibility still relies on absolute effort." He listened in silence to William's words. Time passed and the test results were announced. A week later, Mayan had successfully passed the knowledge exam. Mayan stood beaming among the crowd, looking at the admission list. If he had been 1 point short, he would have failed. The atmosphere at the camp was incredibly gloomy. With only 1 month left before the combat evaluation, many who were enraged by Mayan's success gathered. The brown-haired youth's father shouted in a rage, "Host family, what is the meaning of this? Isn't he illiterate?" The brown-haired youth clenched his fists and replied firmly, "He must have cheated, father." Many arguments broke out, especially among the nobles whose children scored lower than Mayan. The blonde youth's father scowled and growled every word. "My son's knowledge is inferior to a slave's." The blonde youth turned pale, chanting to himself to endure it, while his father grumbled about what a ridiculous test it was. The blonde youth gripped the paper in his hand, thinking of Mayan studying with William. However, a rare few remembered seeing Mayan studying late into the night and felt ashamed of themselves. The panel of judges, their faces etched with tension, questioned the candidates while Smiley stood silently before them for the essay portion. Furthermore, Smiley's values and tactics mirrored those of ancient wartime heroes as he calmly delivered his answers. "In war, the priority isn't the power to crush the enemy, but the will to protect people," Smiley said, echoing the words of the champion. "Therefore, the strategy I mentioned isn't meant to destroy life," he concluded, looking as though he were revitalized by the champion's spirit, "but to save it." The knight captain's eyes widened in shock at Smiley's words. The old man in the center asked, "Is that the boy called Smiley?" the one in the hat whispered. Yes, give him a low score, that's the organizer's request. The knight captain fell into a silent, private contemplation, closing his eyes to think, wondering if he could be of any help. However, the knight captain then scribbled a note on the paper. Special bonus, +1. He watched Smiley intently, lost in thought. I once hoped you wouldn't join the knight's training festival because it would cause a stir, but seeing you now, I've changed my mind. Recalling every one of the boys' strikes, the knight captain silently noted that he wasn't just a common brawler. He suddenly realized something. Now I understand why Lu Ka-si-teng risked his life to protect you. The image of a grinning Lu Ka-si-teng flashed through the captain's mind. The knight captain curled his lip and clenched his fist in excitement. Smiley, I want to see where your path leads. Leaning against the table, Smiley turned to William and asked, William, will you join the selection evaluation? Since you're already a knight, you don't need the written test. Only the combat trial. William shared, lacking confidence. I don't think I can. With my current strength, I can't even compare to an official knight. My identity would be exposed instantly. Smiley followed up with another question. So if you reached their level, would you participate? The brown-haired man crossed his arms, his face full of mockery. What's this? Is this guy actually planning to train for the exam? The crowd buzzed as they watched Smiley practicing his swordplay under William's supervision. It looks like William himself is coaching him. William is even teaching him the theory. Impressive, I wish I could get lessons like that. Heroic knowledge. I'm so jealous. The brown-haired man frowned sarcastically. A joke, fighting isn't just swinging a stick. His posture is absolute garbage. No wonder he uses his fists. He licked his lips, brimming with confidence. Yeah, baby, keep that level of skill, and when you get up here, I'll break every bone in your body. This is getting interesting. The brown-haired man tilted his head and waved dismissively. I told you I wanted to hide in the warehouse to practice because I was embarrassed. Let's go. Ignoring the stares, Smiley spoke cheerfully to William. See that, William? I'm mimicking you perfectly. William gave a forced smile as he looked at Smiley's stance. Is that really how I stand? I think they were just insulting us. William closed his eyes and pressed a hand to his forehead, feeling the weight of it. Seeing it in person made it clear. It was a total mess. Thoughts and actions were two different things. Looking at the wooden sword in his hand, Smiley suggested, Then spar with me to fix your posture. I'll fight exactly like you and point out the flaws that need fixing. He looked up at William and added firmly, And I'll see how much you've improved. I'll adjust my level to match yours. From now until the exam in a month, try to beat me as many times as you can. Stunned by Smiley's declaration, William asked in confusion, Fighting exactly like me? Is that even possible? Smiley enthusiastically pointed his sword at William and shouted, Get up. William, you've shown what you can do. Now it's my turn. The brown-haired man sat at a table, chatting boisterously with others. No training today, how relaxing. William took a serious stance, holding his sword diagonally to one side. He thought, the opponent's gaze and toe movements, they're within a predictable range. He decisively swung his blade downward. Then William quickly parried the opponent's attack and immediately rushed forward to counter. Regaining the upper hand, William raised his sword high before stepping back a few paces. He gripped the hilt tightly and crouched, his eyes fixed on the man before him. You're too slow. You should have timed that more precisely. Ineffective attacks just waste stamina. He narrowed his eyes, his gaze filled with determination, dodging, defending, and measuring the distance simultaneously. Sweat beaded on William's face as he realized the truth through direct sparring. A set of principles began to take shape in his mind. This was actually a battle of wits, reading patterns, baiting, validating, spacing, countering, timing, defensive tactics, and offensive forms. Adjusting, countering, stabilizing, timing, striking, patterns, feint intensity, and breaking defenses. Executing, parrying, breaching guards, and luring with feints. Battle required predicting every move to build a strategy. William realized with shock that Smiley Face's attacks, sweeps, thrusts, parries, and stamina drain existed in an entirely different realm of combat. His expression relaxed as he pointed his sword forward, finally grasping the essence of it. He analyzed the rhythm, preemptive strikes, ambushes, finishers, stance shifts, and rapid-fire thrusts into openings. William squinted one eye as a blurred image flickered in his mind. Losing focus, his eyes widened as he felt a blade descending toward him. William frowned and gritted his teeth, thinking decisively that an opening had appeared and must be blocked immediately. But then he froze, realizing the nature of the attack. William stared at the sharp tip of the sword aimed at his face and judged it to be too short. Pursing his lips, he pulled his sword back, standing firm in his conviction. Counterattacking was the right answer, yet William froze when he felt the tip of the blade against his neck. His eyes darted down in confusion. William quickly recognized his opponent's technique and chuckled, realizing it was a feigned slash followed by a sudden thrust, before letting out a long sigh. Then William broke into a bright smile as his image faded like mist, revealing half of Smiley Face's visage. He excitedly announced his 313th victory. Smiley Face watched William and offered his enthusiastic congratulations. He struggled to place a hand on his shoulder without replying immediately. William reflected that he had barely won this time before slumping to the ground to rest. With only one day left until the official duel, William had spent the entire month honing his skills. But as he watched Smiley Face's back, he found the other man even more astonishing. William was stunned to realize that Smiley Face had perfectly mimicked his mistakes, habits, and strategies. Even more shocking was that he had copied his injuries, including the exact shoulder trauma. This went beyond simple imitation, leaving him wondering how it was possible. Smiley Face then eagerly suggested they end early so William could rest for the upcoming evaluation. He immediately agreed, but then the knight captain crossed his arms and sternly informed William that he would not be participating in the evaluation. During the knight orders competition, he only needed to stand by the captain's side and observe, as the evaluation no longer held any meaning for him. He was told he would simply sit with the king and greet the citizens. The captain had planned to inform him after the event, surprised that William had approached him first. The knight captain stroked his chin thoughtfully, assuming William wouldn't want to participate since his true skill level would be exposed if he actually dueled the knights. William lowered his head in silence and clenched his fists, his mind in turmoil as he realized that after only a month of training, he was still far behind the professional knights. Training was ultimately about surpassing oneself, yet he remained inadequate compared to real knights. Nevertheless, William firmly declared his desire to participate in the evaluation. He argued that he would be lacking regardless of when he started, so he wished to begin by acknowledging his flaws. The captain closed his eyes, frustrated by William's unexpected stubbornness. He snorted at William's hopeful gaze as sunlight filled the area. The next morning, the knights gathered at the arena for the evaluation, where the brown-haired boy's father spoke up. He called for fair scoring, noting that despite their supporting role, they shouldn't inflate his son's points. As the knights lined up, William and a second-ranked knight were called for the first match. It was hero William against a second-ranked knight, causing the red-clad knights to whisper in confusion about whether the commander was also participating. Neither of them was supposed to be in the official competition, so the brown-clad spectators excitedly speculated that it was just a demonstration match to explain the rules. Despite that, the anticipation was high. Inside the tent, the knight captain sternly instructed the second-ranked knight to go easy on his opponent. He explained that although William possessed immense willpower, he had never held a sword before and lacked actual combat strength. The captain urged the knight to end the match naturally, noting that while William seemed to know the basics, the fight should be finished quickly before anyone grew suspicious. The knight captain narrowed his eyes with a serious expression as William looked away, his gaze filled with uncertainty. The second-ranked knight gripped his wooden sword, curious about Smiley Face's true strength, as the referee raised 2 flags to signal the start. Yes, then, he silently evaluated Smiley in his heart. If he could defeat that band of exiled clowns, he would be worthy of recognition even within the Knight Order. William lunged toward the second-class knight, disarming him in a flash. The referee sternly warned William about his premature action, stating he must wait for the signal to start. He flusteredly bowed and apologized repeatedly, claiming he was too nervous. The blonde boy's father mocked him, remarking that he was a perfect example of what not to do. The brown-haired boy's father feigned sympathy while dripping with sarcasm, noting it was a common mistake for rookies during their first match, adding that it was quite a performance. A bead of sweat rolled down the second-class knight's face as he turned stiffly toward the knight captain, who was equally stunned by what had just transpired. The commander had not expected this at all. The knight captain was somewhat surprised by William's prowess as the referee raised the red flag and signaled the start of the match. He suddenly recalled William's words, remembering the boy's dead serious expression when he vowed to become someone whom neither pen nor sword could break. Watching the duel between the second-class knight and William below, the knight captain was amazed to see those words becoming a reality so quickly. He glided across the ground to strike the second-class knight. Smiley watched William from the sidelines, being the only one who understood the cause of the crowd's confusion. He thought back to their training sessions where they discovered a new pattern. The more he imitated William, the more he realized the boy was forging a nearly flawless style of swordsmanship. Restraint, specialized techniques, and aggressive momentum. He continuously transitioned between strikes and counters, utilizing his opponent's force with specialized speed. Smiley crossed his arms in anticipation of William's performance, grinning as he acknowledged that this unique swordsmanship belonged solely to William. To be honest, imitating him was becoming quite a burden. The second-class knight frowned, thinking to himself that the boy still wasn't fast enough. He swiftly evaded William's attack while the knight captain narrowed his eyes, judging the strikes as not particularly powerful. William gritted his teeth, struggling against the knight's counteroffensive. He and the second-class knight traded blows relentlessly, showcasing unconventional thinking and precise footwork in every movement. William and his opponent swung through the air before passing each other, leaving the second-class knight to ponder the intense determination reflected in the boy's eyes. He made difficult yet correct decisions at every turn. The knight raised his sword to block William's strike, which initially seemed like a standard exchange. It appeared to be an ordinary duel, but the second-class knight was stunned by the boy's ferocity, sensing a level of experience that was truly overwhelming. The crowd whispered as they watched the intense battle unfold, wondering if this was truly just an exhibition match, since the two seemed so evenly matched. Both were incredibly serious. The second-class knight pulled his sword back, his gaze fixed on William, who had been exposing weaknesses until now. If he had wanted to, he could have ended it with a single blow. The second-class knight recalled the captain's warning and tightened his grip on his sword. William was bewildered as the knight pressed the attack, his expression turning pensive as he quickly sensed something unusual about his opponent's behavior. He was holding back. I realized everything the moment he and the captain exchanged glances. He gripped his sword with trembling hands, knowing he still lacked many things. But I want him to give his all, William thought, gritting his teeth and pouring his strength into a strike, only for the knight to suddenly raise his hand and surrender, leaving him in utter disbelief as the referee ended the match. He continued, announcing that the exhibition match was over, prompting the audience to erupt into cheers and applause. The referee stood between William and the knight, asking them to shake hands, while the other knights buzzed with confusion over the sudden surrender. He leaned his trembling, wounded hand against his sword before regaining his composure and closing his eyes in self-reproach. No, I am still lacking. Because of this, I couldn't even bring out my opponent's true strengths. In the distance, the knight captain smiled, impressed that the boy had fought far better than expected. What on earth has he been doing this past month? He turned to the second-class knight and praised him for stopping at the right time and playing his part well. The knight responded solemnly, admitting that he hadn't been acting and truly could not have continued, leaving the knight captain utterly perplexed. His legs trembled as he struggled to stand firm, the second-ranked knight recalling William's opening strike against his legs. From the very beginning, William had targeted my ankles, relentlessly striking them before launching a non-stop assault on the second-ranked knight and controlling the flow with countless thrusts. William lunged toward him, his blade slicing through the air, forcing the second-ranked knight to plant his left foot firmly due to the pressure of the strikes. He repeatedly forced me to rely on my left leg, and as the pressure on my ankle mounted, I realized I could no longer fight, leading me to tell the knight captain I had lost, while the blond man frowned and offered his critique. William had numerous opportunities to end the match before his opponent surrendered. Had he been more decisive, his victory would have been certain. He turned toward the smiling youth upon hearing the speculation, suggesting that William might have been waiting for a powerful strike from his opponent. Crossing his arms, he continued as the blond man and Finn watched in shock, explaining that such a move would provide an opening to counterattack and inflict maximum damage despite his limited strength. Blond man knit his brows at the smiling youth's words, while Finn stared in perpetual bewilderment. Yet the youth merely offered them a serene gaze. He stormed over to the smiling youth and barked, "You idiot, what do you think you know? Stop acting like you understand everything, brat." But the youth's silence left Finn frozen and drenched in sweat. He suddenly recalled his own duel with the smiling youth and reflected that, ever since that match, he had begun to feel a strange sense of empathy toward him. Finn's hand trembled as he pointed at the joyful youth, who drove him to madness even as that harmless expression left him utterly confused. He clicked his tongue and turned away, muttering about how they were acting far too familiar, while Finn narrowed his eyes and gave a somber explanation. Few knights here are as well-trained as William. Usually, they just make the trainees clean instead of engaging in one-on-one combat, so you are truly fortunate. "You fool," he grumbled, looking toward the arena in frustration. "If it weren't for you, I might have passed the literacy exam and entered the tournament myself. And why must I appear so late? If only my family had more influence," he lamented, before the smiling youth looked at Finn and made a bright suggestion. "Would you like to train with us? William needs sparring partners," he offered, causing Finn to whip around in shock and exclaim, "What? Lord William. Finn screamed internally to mind his manners, you idiot, before raising a hand and hesitantly agreeing with a reluctant, sarcastic, fine. However, having someone like you there will significantly lower the standards, he remarked, just as a black-haired boy poked his head out to ask if he could join, followed by another light-haired boy raising his hand in support. I want to as well, they cried, and suddenly everyone rushed forward to join, prompting an irritated Finn to swing his arm and knock them back while screaming for them to shut up. Must I really negotiate with a servant just to have Lord William train me? He grumbled, while a group of brown-haired boys watched the commotion around the smiling youth from a distance. He tilted his head in disdain, muttering about the sight of them, while two boys behind him bickered over an insult just as the king let out a long yawn before the next match. 33 matches later, the trumpets blared for a long time as the brown-haired boy raised his hand and laughed arrogantly while stepping onto the field, announcing that it was finally his turn. The knight captain knit his brows in thought at the scene, while the blonde boy grumbled about the musical accompaniment, noting that the contestant was already acting like a knight, a sentiment his companion echoed. He might as well be. Do you have any idea how much money his father poured into this just to make his son a knight? The boy added, as the arrogant brown-haired youth finally spoke. Let us begin by eliminating those who do not belong here, he said, beckoning the smiling youth with 2 fingers and ordering the slave to step forward. The knight captain frowned at the brown-haired boy's blatant rudeness, while the boy's father began to boast, asking those around him if he hadn't raised his son well. My son will not tolerate anything filthy, he declared, as the brown-haired boy and the smiling youth stood opposite each other with their swords drawn. He licked his lips in excitement, thinking about how much he looked forward to tearing his opponent apart, just as the blonde boy suddenly called out from behind Finn. Hey, Finn, he said, glancing toward the smiling youth. When you fought him, did you really give him a brutal beating? Finn jumped in surprise and shouted back, asking why he would even bring that up, to which the blonde boy replied that he had happened to witness their match while closely observing Finn's reaction. Finn's face was drenched in sweat as he recalled the moment he pointed his sword at Happy and hissed, I won't accept this, you piece of trash. The blonde youth rested his chin on his hand, contemplating the match and sensing something peculiar about the boy as he stared pensively at the ground. I feel as though he is suppressing his true strength, the blonde youth remarked quietly before asking, Did you notice anything out of the ordinary while you were fighting him? Finn's mouth hung open in protest as he snapped. Unusual? Not at all. Stop interrogating me, you fool. He then added a speculative remark. Are you suggesting you could defeat him again if you had the chance for a rematch? Finn's expression stiffened, sweat pouring down his face as he stared at Happy as if looking at a monster, muttering nervously to himself. Watching the boy's retreating figure, the blonde youth spoke candidly. Every time I look at him, I get an inexplicably eerie feeling, as if he exists in an entirely different world, though Finn did not seem to agree. After a moment of silence, he added, To be honest, I don't quite get it. He just seems like a simpleton to me. He then gestured toward Happy, who was holding a wooden sword, and remarked, Well, this match will reveal everything to us. Sitting on the ground and watching Happy, William shared his thoughts. Happy, I believe it would be best if you stuck to using only a sword during these elimination matches. With a grave expression, he continued, I've known this since the first day. Happy, no matter how much talent one possesses, they will never acknowledge you if you aren't a swordsman. William recalled the intense agitation of the knights. He spoke somberly, so just give them a reason to acknowledge you. There is no need to hide your strength. Show them from the very beginning who the true master is here. William added that the new format of the free-writing test had worked in his favor, remembering the harsh criticisms from Finn, the brown-haired youth, and the others who still viewed Happy with contempt as a mere slave. This is a perfect opportunity to change their perception of you, William said with a faint, confident smile. I can say with absolute certainty, Happy leveled his sword forward as his friend's words echoed in his ears. This arena was created solely for you. The brown-haired youth burst into mocking laughter at the boy's stance and jeered. So you finally started taking your training seriously. That posture isn't half bad. He showed no hesitation in his disdain, adding, But that's all it is. He recalled his father's boastful declaration that the path had been cleared and his son would receive 1,000,000 points. Happy lowered his sword slightly and activated a skill to the other's horror. Basic sword technique. The brown-haired youth's brow furrowed in shock at the boy's incredible speed. Their blades collided with immense force. Gritting his teeth, the brown-haired youth struggled to parry Happy's assault, his face turning beet red as he let out a fierce roar. He pulled his sword back, his eyes burning with rage as he funneled all his strength into his weapon. Happy remained composed, observing every movement before both of them lunged to strike simultaneously. Happy delivered a decisive strike that left the other man frozen in place. As the image of a dove flashed before the brown-haired youth's eyes, a wound opened on his forehead. A crimson liquid began to trickle down the brown-haired youth's face as the entire crowd fell into a deathly silence. The knight captain watched the match with intense focus. "Strike to the head," the second-rank knight noted internally, praising the flawless execution. William smiled, thinking he would receive a perfect score, while Finn's eyes widened in disbelief. "What, is it already over?" Finn exclaimed, while the blonde youth stood stunned by the clean finish. Meanwhile, the brown-haired youth's father frowned, visibly tense. Referee raised the yellow flag and loudly declared for the match to continue. William's eyes widened in disbelief at what he heard, while the knight captain cursed under his breath. "That bastard! What on earth is he doing?" The referee was drenched in sweat and trembling, his mind racing with the realization that in his 10 years of officiating, he had taken bribes for a sum he could never earn in a lifetime. He turned pale, searching for any excuse to let the match continue so the other boy could win. "I was momentarily distracted and failed to track the movement," the referee claimed. He then turned to the brown-haired youth and remarked that even if he were struck, his bonus points would still ensure his victory. "Stay on your feet," he muttered. The brown-haired youth glared at his own hand and hissed, "You bastard!" before raising his sword high and screaming frantically, "I was just distracted. Now I'll show you what I'm capable of," the boy yelled. William's expression darkened as he wondered if they were truly going to proceed as if nothing had happened. The brown-haired youth's teeth were clenched as he noticed William standing behind him. "That scoundrel is only capable of that much," the brown-haired youth thought, convinced that William had expected him to let his guard down and had instigated his disciple to act. "Now try to dodge this," he barked, his mouth agape. "One slash is all it takes to end this." However, he cursed like a cornered animal as Happy's blade struck him squarely in the back. "You vermin." The spectators watched the brown-haired youth's pathetic struggle and marveled at Happy's prowess. "He's good," they whispered. "He doesn't seem like a gladiator at all." Consumed by a humiliated rage, the youth raised his sword high and bellowed, "I will show you a technique beyond your wildest dreams. Watch closely." The brown-haired youth was stunned to see Happy's blade at his throat, and after pushing the sword away, he was struck in a vital spot, prompting the panicked referee to intervene and shout for them to stop because his belt had slipped. He wiped the sweat from his face and told them to fix the gear and restart, inwardly wondering what on earth the boy was doing instead of just finishing the fight. From the sidelines, William watched the match intently, noting that the skill gap was so vast that Happy could dominate the duel using nothing more than a simple wooden stick. Happy continued to exceed all expectations as usual, making it clear to everyone that this was a total victory and leaving Jun, the father of the brown-haired boy, trembling in disbelief. "No, this can't be happening," he stammered, while Happy calmly tilted his head at his opponent, his eyes filled with confusion as to why they wouldn't just end the match. Happy evaluated the other man's condition, noting that such injuries would have been fatal in a real battle, before narrowing his eyes and finally speaking to him. "I heard you were among the finest gladiators," Happy remarked, leaving the brown-haired youth bewildered before following up with a sharp, mocking taunt. "But no matter how you look at it, you are still at the very bottom," Happy said, causing the other to snap in rage as Happy recalled his time observing the trainees with William. "I have spent the past month closely observing everyone's training, including yours, and you truly possess a natural fighting spirit and confidence, along with a decent physique." Remembered the man's arrogant expression in combat, a trait so rare that it likely caused others to surrender or reach hasty conclusions whenever they faced him, leading Happy to smile as he declared the truth. "Even though they could have easily defeated you," Happy stated, causing Pion's eyes to widen in horror as he realized that the same thing had been said during his own fight. Realizing he had been shown mercy, the brown-haired youth charged in a blind rage, screaming for Happy to shut up, while the latter calmly raised his blade. The brown-haired youth froze, his face turning pale as Happy took on the aura of a monster and told him his fighting spirit was now broken, prompting a desperate, screaming attack from the scum. In that instant, Happy delivered a decisive blow, his blade flashing past the panicked eyes of the brown-haired youth. William watched in shock, realizing that Happy had calculated every detail, the timing, the stance, and the strike, from the very moment he started provoking his foe. Stunned by his shattered weapon, the brown-haired youth watched as Happy drove his own sword into the ground and leaned against it to make a proposal. "If you wish, I will concede this first match to you," Happy offered, just as the referee raised the flags to make a formal announcement. Happy is the winner. I have done everything possible, the official declared, causing the brown-haired boy's father to foam at the mouth and faint. As the brown-haired youth knelt on the ground in submission, Happy spoke to the crowd in a somber tone, warning them never to treat him like a slave again. To continue doing so would be a disgrace to yourselves and the entire knighthood, he added, before sitting down and scratching his neck while questioning William. Was it truly necessary to say all that? Is winning not enough? He asked, but William firmly replied that a simple victory would not suffice. You didn't just show them your strength, Happy. I will ensure they understand that your power is rooted in responsibility. It represents the restraint and the will of a true knight. If you don't understand, just look at the people around you, William said, prompting Happy to look at the crowd. His eyes widened in shock as he witnessed the positive reaction from the knights, seeing that every single one of them was moved by his display. Standing amidst the thunderous applause of the crowd who now acknowledged him, Happy turned toward William with a radiant smile. William gave him a thumbs up in approval, but suddenly a hand rose from the crowd as someone called out a challenge, causing Happy to turn toward the source. I also wish to challenge Happy, as my previous opponent has already forfeited, the blonde youth stated firmly, while the knight captain watched and evaluated the situation. This evaluation match has become an absolute mess, the captain thought, glancing at the brown-haired boy's father, who was cursing the organizers as he stormed off. The captain then turned his gaze toward the sweating referee, who was still holding the flags, realizing that the panel of judges had been bribed. He looked at the blonde youth's bold demand and the arrogant, disobedient students, wondering if everyone had lost their minds as he ground his teeth in silent fury. I wanted to halt everything and restart the lessons from the beginning, but the knight captain narrowed his eyes and remained composed, likely sharing the same sentiment as everyone else. The blonde youth stepped onto the field alongside Smiley. The captain observed the second-class knight's expectant gaze, while William's eyes were also filled with great anticipation. One more match, Finn thought, eyes wide as he waited for the next round, while the blonde youth narrowed his eyes with resolve and the referee broke into a cold sweat. The king gestured for them to proceed, and the blonde youth turned to Smiley, admitting he knew the other's strength was far more than just a hollow reputation. Your skill level is truly unpredictable, he declared firmly, proposing a genuine challenge without realizing the full weight of his words. William repeatedly signaled an X to Smiley, urging him to attack with full force, leaving Finn stunned and wondering if he truly possessed such a side to his character. It felt as though he were looking at a completely different person, as Smiley and the blonde youth leveled their swords at each other under the crowd's expectant gaze. Just like in this academy, Happy was not only recognized but had become an inspiration. The blonde youth gripped his sword tensely, lunged forward, and thrust his blade towards Smiley. He raised his sword to block the blonde youth's strike, his pupils reflecting the image of the descending blade as the other man lifted his weapon high. No matter where the attack came from, Smiley dodged with immediate agility, leaving William agape and unable to tear his eyes away from the duel for even a second. The difference was undeniable. Every movement was perfectly linked, far exceeding the level of an apprentice knight, making him wonder if this was what a tower built on a solid foundation looked like. With nowhere left to hide, it was time to settle the matter. Smiley suddenly lunged forward as the blonde youth narrowed his eyes in silent evaluation. From defense to counterattacks and strikes, his skills were truly magnificent, causing a thrill of excitement to curl the corners of his lips. Acknowledging this was no ordinary skill level, the blonde youth noted signs of rushed learning and, confident in his own superior foundation, delivered a decisive blow without holding back. Smiley glared and raised his sword to block the strike with a flawless technique that left no openings, leaving the blonde youth staring in utter shock. Smiley's eyes curved into a terrifying expression seen only in the Night Order. A thud echoed, prompting the referee and Finn to lean in and ask the blonde youth if he was all right. "Hey, are you okay?" the referee asked, while Smiley leaned on his sword and calmly remarked that his head had been severed, sending the blonde youth into a panicked scream as he clutched his neck. Smiley turned to the blonde youth and explained it was just a joke, and he had only blacked out for a moment, allowing the other to regain his composure and watch him intently. Recalling his failed finishing move, the blonde youth realized that after Smiley dropped his blade, he had used the hilt to strike his neck, leaving him wide-eyed at the realization of the pommel strike. Watching the other man touch the mark on his neck, Smiley praised him, admitting his movements were indeed perfect and lacked any visible openings. He narrowed his eyes and calmly explained that the issue lay in using the same swordsmanship repeatedly, noting that every stance was identical to those practiced in daily drills. They merely repeated the techniques they knew. But in a real duel, death often comes from an unpredictable strike that one has never experienced before. Facing an unimaginable and unpredictable technique, the blond youth lowered his head and let out a long, heavy sigh. It feels as if everything I've built has been denied and collapsed, he shared, but Smiley corrected him, saying it wasn't a collapse but rather a breaking of boundaries. Look at the bigger picture, Smiley said, leaving the blond youth trembling and frozen as they locked eyes in the somber atmosphere. He scratched his head and apologized to William for fighting his own way, to which William replied that his performance in the first match was more than sufficient. "Oh, I've also found an opponent for you," Smiley added, leaving William confused as he excitedly pointed toward the group of blonde knights that had somehow grown in number. Black ink on paper confirmed Happy's participation in the evaluation match. The knight captain rested his hands on the table with a satisfied smile as the second-class knight turned to him. He then looked away with a relieved smile while Winnie clutched her bag and reminded them that the evaluation day was near, prompting the white-haired elderly woman to make a kind suggestion. "I must go buy some meat for the boy," she said, as a shopkeeper greeted them warmly and Ellie, smiling brightly while holding the hem of her skirt, asked a flustered question. "What should I wear for the evaluation day? I have to go cheer for him." William's mother replied that William wasn't even taking part in the evaluation. The girl explained enthusiastically that she meant Happy and had to cheer for him. Saga looked at the small scrap of cloth before him, silently reading the words written on it. "The day is near. Sharpen your blade and prepare for the assassination." The old corpse collector approached Saga with a shovel and asked what was written there. He turned and calmly replied that it was just a simple piece of cloth he found while working. Saga looked at the old man curiously and asked what was going on. He slowly responded that it was nothing major. The old corpse collector held up a necklace with a skull pendant and explained gloomily, "When you spend more time with the dead than the living, they sometimes bother you. This is an amulet to protect you from them." The old corpse collector handed it to Saga, adding that he had used it in his youth, and it was a reward for his hard work. He put the necklace on and said gratefully, "Thank you, this is exactly what I need." The old man walked past Saga and called back, "What you really need is your wages. You must work to get paid, so get ready and follow me." In the thick fog covering the trees, Red Eyes held up a small cloth to his eyes when a sudden sound startled him. "Fellow knights." An exhausted knight ran over to report that a murderer had attacked and urged them to go to the kingdom to report the danger immediately. Red Eyes remained silent. The knight glared and shouted an order, asking why he was just standing there and telling him to hurry. He was then swiftly dealt with by Red Eyes, who cast a cold gaze forward. Karina stood behind the fallen knight and remarked that the exiled bandit gang that once fought together had collapsed. She gripped her sword and declared boldly that she would now go alone to take the king's head. Chapter 26. A man in blue stabbed the green-eyed man with a sword. About 50 days ago, he was shackled and huddled in a dark prison cell. When the leader of the exiled bandits was handed over to the guards, the green-eyed man was hung in the air by Red Eyes, who questioned him coldly. "Who brought the royal family members into the arena?" The green-eyed man weakly replied that it was Lucaston. Red Eyes then repeatedly struck him with a weapon, seemingly knowing the green-eyed man was lying, and countered gloomily that it wasn't that nobleman. A blurry, terrifying, smiling face appeared with wide eyes. Lucaston's grinning figure emerged as he turned pale and bowed his head to the ground before the king. Yet for some reason, he confessed to a crime he didn't commit, calming the king's rage and using his own death to settle the matter. Red Eyes leaned close to the green-eyed man and said that while the case had ended that way, they were still searching for the true perpetrator. He wondered why Red Eyes Group continued to investigate the case, asking who "we" referred to since the king had already closed the matter. "What reason do you people have to keep investigating?" He then delivered a painful blow to the green-eyed man's stomach. Red Eyes remained indifferent to the green-eyed man's determined gaze and remarked that he surely knew they weren't part of the Night Order. He growled each word, explaining that they had a plan to eliminate the royal family, but the bandits had interfered first, ruining everything. Red Eyes recalled when he had infiltrated the Knights. His hidden identity was at risk of being exposed because someone else was targeting the royals. He hid behind some crates to avoid the searching soldiers. "Search everywhere to find the culprit." Red Eyes held a branch and looked out the window. The old corpse collector and Saga looked down at the body on the ground. If his side hadn't found the royal body and redirected the investigation, then everything would have been over. He said nothing and turned to Saga. Red Eyes added emotionlessly that if such trouble were caused again, then this assassination plan would also collapse. The green-eyed man pondered in shock, realizing that assassination groups were hiding everywhere. He lowered his head and closed his eyes, thinking that the kingdom was already rotten even without his involvement. Red Eyes looked directly into the green-eyed man's eyes and ordered him to tell the truth so they could succeed. If it wasn't you, then who hunted the royal family? After a long silence, the green-eyed man uttered a name. Karina, she was the one who did it. Red eyes scrutinized him as he gloomily confessed that she wasn't actually a member of the exiled bandits, but a stranger who wanted to join just to kill the king. Karina crossed her arms and indifferently suggested to the green-eyed man, "Let me join. Can I call you leader?" She lurked outside the city gates to gather intelligence, and once she had what she needed, she immediately broke in and abducted a member of the royal family. She ruthlessly grabbed him by the head and tore out his hair before dragging him to the sewers to shave him bald, eventually selling the royal man to the arena. He strained his neck and insisted he was royalty, calling her a lunatic, but she saw him as nothing more than a valuable piece of meat. As he screamed about a misunderstanding in the arena, someone roared for him to go find his ancestors in a pigsty. "Filthy scum," the green-haired man remarked indifferently to his companion, while the red-eyed man asked in confusion why she was targeting the royal family. "Is it for revenge, a mission, or is she a spy? Where did she come from?" The green-eyed man replied helplessly that she hadn't revealed a thing. Karina curled her lip in clear disdain and snapped, "Damn it, do you really need a reason to slaughter a pig? If you're hungry, you just kill it." She stumbled away with disheveled hair as the red-eyed man watched her in silence, his hand tucked into his clothes as he coldly remarked that he should have dealt with her much sooner. "To think it would lead to such an incident," he said, prompting Karina to glare at him and demand to know who he was and how he knew her. Her gaze shifted to the red-eyed man's arm as he drew a sharp blade from beneath his cloak and hurled it directly at her. She ducked and parried the blade with her sword, glaring at the red-eyed man as she realized his weapon did not belong to the Night Order. As the dagger thudded into the lush green grass, her eyes narrowed in thought, questioning if he was truly a knight just as he swung a chain toward her. She twisted her body to evade the chain's strikes, certain he wasn't a knight, and squinted with growing interest as she challenged him to show his true strength. The red-eyed man was taken aback by her attitude as Karina sliced through the links of his chain and struck the mask right off his face. She stood frozen at the sight of his face, wondering what had happened to it, before noting his many scars and asking if self-mutilation was his hobby. Pointing her sharp blade at his throat, she emphasized every word as she asked if he truly wasn't part of the Night Order, to which he gave a blunt reply. "We are a group with the same objective as you," he said, leaving Karina stunned as she repeated his words, wondering who else besides the exiled bandits would hunt the royals. "Are there others hunting the royal family?" she mused, but he somberly warned her that if she continued to cause such a commotion, then annihilating the royals would become impossible as guards would be reinforced and the walls made thicker, prompting Karina to flash a mocking smirk at him. "And you think you can?" she challenged, but he firmly retorted that the king's assassination had long been planned and was nearing execution, provided she didn't ruin it. She looked down with suspicion and contemplated for a moment before admitting her lack of trust, then raised her sword to make a demand. "Then let me join the plan, and I will wait quietly until the day of the assassination," she said, holding her sword against him as she explained that since her current ship had sunk, she needed to board a new one immediately. He looked away and suggested that such a matter was for the Grand Master to decide, telling her to follow him as Karina tilted her head in curiosity. The Grand Master, she wondered as torches flickered against the earthen walls, her eyes widening when his massive hand pinned her against the surface. His eyes were devoid of emotion as he granted his approval, telling her not to be afraid because he accepted her, while Karina trembled in utter confusion with her head tilted back. The Grand Master removed his hand from her face and commanded her to go, instructing her in a deep voice to stay by his son's side and serve him as a true servant. Karina narrowed her eyes and muttered the name Saga, who was currently drenched in sweat and drinking water on a cart when a voice called out. "This is a slave who will be working for a few days," the old body collector said, glancing at Karina and adding that she was just a laborer looking to earn some coin. She tilted her head and watched Saga intently, asking if he was the man's son before approaching him to whisper softly. "I will be staying here until the day of the challenge," she said, as the morning light bathed the arena with only 3 days remaining until the duel. The moonlight cast the shadows of many people onto the white wall as they gathered around a large table, engaged in a heated and tense discussion. "We cannot allow the match to be manipulated like this. Is there no way to stop it, no matter who can intervene?" the brown-haired boy's father roared, his hands trembling as he clenched them into tight fists. A slave and a commoner suddenly appearing to stage a duel. "Such an act shows utter contempt for nobles like us," the man in the red coat remarked. Slave is one thing, but William is a different matter, the man in brown agreed. Indeed, his academic brilliance is simply too exceptional. Churches are vying for the chance to sponsor him, the black-haired man reminded them in a low voice. Furthermore, consider his merit in defeating the exiled bandits who were hunting nobles. The man in brown raised a finger in agreement. That is true. It was thanks to him that we survived. His family's standing is now equal to that of any noble house. Suddenly, someone cut him off. What if all of those achievements were nothing but fabrications? The man in brown was stunned as the curly-haired boy's father slammed his clenched fists onto the table and growled, repeating the question. What if we have all been deceived? So do you all want to participate in the plan to finish William off for good in this match? A brown-haired man asked in fear. What do you mean? Is it all a lie? Hearing him, one person grew furious over the recent achievements, and William's father exploded in rage, questioning how a useless person could achieve such things. The gray-haired man coldly told him that his words must come with responsibility. Are you sure? At that point, his anger subsided and his tone softened as he said his son didn't just understand William. He also knew that slave very well. Then, remembering what happened, the curly-haired man whispered that his name was Happia, the arena champion. From then on, the truth was slowly revealed about a man who couldn't fight and was dying in pain. It was hard to believe he could suddenly behead 3 mercenaries and destroy an entire bandit gang. According to the guards, William only took credit for the bounty hunt. Meanwhile, the brown-haired man thought for a while and then spoke up. Actually, I have something to say. My son overheard the captain's conversation with the commander. His son heard the captain tell the commander that William had never even held a sword. He then recounted that William was actually an amateur who had never held a blade. After hearing this, the brown-haired man's father asked in great surprise, "What, so the match was a staged performance?" Then the nobles who had been waiting gradually began to speak. One person began to update the situation, saying that many people actually knew that slave. He didn't hesitate to continue, saying he was quite famous in the arena, but after nearly being executed for the prince's death, they were afraid and kept quiet to avoid being involved in the case. After hearing that, it was clear that we shouldn't expose the slave, but instead overthrow the William imposter. If we do that, the slave will automatically disappear. Then, a voice spoke up, asking how to do it since he had already been knighted. If we make one mistake, it could lead to the crime of insulting the crown. He approached the brown-haired man's father and suggested staging a kidnapping on the day of the match. They began to discuss the plan, where a fake exiled bandit hired by them would kidnap the nobles and demand to fight William. Then, we would all praise William, asking him to perform just like before. At this point, he gave a sinister smile and said if he didn't step up, he'd be called a coward, and if he did, he'd be in big trouble. The others also whispered and agreed with his idea. For the sake of the nobles' lives, the Knight Order would have no choice but to agree. Great, let's do that. On this side, Happy was so happy he was jumping for joy. Ellie also shouted, "Let's go!" Right after that, Happy kept puffing out his cheeks to get ready. He tried to use all his strength to push down the tree in front of him. The small fruits on the tree immediately fell to the ground. Ellie happily said while picking them up, "There are so many." Happy also picked them up very quickly. Finally, the two threw the fruit they had gathered into the fire. The fire blazed, burning the husks. Meanwhile, Happy and Ellie used their feet to peel the fruit, revealing the seeds inside. A fragrant aroma spread everywhere. Then both smiled with satisfaction and ate heartily. Winnie looked down at Ellie and told her gently, "Thank you for helping me collect the herbs." Ellie looked up at her and explained with a smile that it was nothing, as she really wanted to come along to play with Happy. Seeing them, Winnie smiled and thought to herself that they both felt happy watching the leaves fall. Then, the two of them played together under the green trees. Ellie exclaimed that the leaves were falling like rain. Winnie began to think they were really alike. Suddenly, there was a voice calling the little girl, "Ellie, let's go home. Your mother is here to pick you up. Goodbye, Happy, and goodbye, Lady Winnie." Seeing that, Ellie hurriedly waved to the two of them, saying she would head back first. Winnie reminded the little girl, "All right, go home carefully." Ellie had already run far away but turned her head back to promise that tomorrow was the match day and she would dress up beautifully to cheer for him. Ellie then left. On this side, both of them fell into deep thought. A moment later, Winnie was the one to start the conversation, asking, "The match is tomorrow. How do you feel?" Happy cheerfully confirmed to her, "I feel fine. I'm very happy that everyone is coming to cheer for me." Winnie looked seriously at his cheerful appearance and was a bit thoughtful. Then, Winnie asked him anxiously, "But are you having any trouble in the Knight Order? Not because of everything that happened, but is this truly what you want?" At this point, she explained with some worry that he had lived his whole life in constant warfare, and the Knight Order was also a place where such wars were learned and originated. Her voice was a bit hesitant and sad, saying that now that he was healed and the reason to fight had disappeared, everything just seemed to drift away. Over here, Happy remained optimistic. asserting that this place was quite different from the arena as he picked up a stick to explain that in the arena, even if he didn't want to, people continued to perish. Recalling past events, he thought about how even those who once loathed him had passed away with such bewildered expressions. It made everything feel futile, but he smiled and affirmed that here, everyone was alive, giving him a chance to learn and a future to change together, leading him to emotionally declare his love for the place. Seeing him like that, Winnie felt more at ease, having been quite anxious, but it appeared everything was fine as there would be no lethal conflicts within the Night Order. Then, as if remembering something, she murmured that the war had ended with their father's generation, ushering in 20 years of sustained peace. This long-lasting peace was achieved through immense sacrifices. Suddenly, Winnie stood up and reminded him to return home, as her grandmother had already prepared some meat. Scene shifts to the following day, the day of the competition, where many knights had gathered. Inside a small house, a voice called out, asking who was there. A man stepped inside and announced he was there to deliver a letter left behind from the day Lucaston passed away, which left Winnie completely stunned. Noticing their confusion, he asked if a slave named Happy was present. Winnie turned and whispered to her grandmother that if this involved Lucaston. Winnie's grandmother nodded, confirming he was Happy's former master and the owner of the arena. The man then began to introduce himself. He explained he came from a remote territory beyond the Empire's reach after a long journey, noting the boy had certainly been registered as a church slave. However, he had been sold from a slave market to a farm. Hearing this, Winnie firmly stated that Happy was no longer a slave. She explained he had become an apprentice knight and offered to deliver the letter to him, but the old man hesitated and waved his hand. He insisted he was ordered to personally meet and read the letter only to Happy before he slowly departed from Winnie's home. With 1 hour left until the match, the crowd began to whisper. They wondered if he had arrived, noting that everyone had gathered because of William. Meanwhile, the king looked around and asked where the princes and princesses were. The queen quickly told the king not to worry as the duke had gone to fetch them, and they would arrive soon. Nearby, the knight captain encouraged William. He told him not to be nervous and to maintain a straight posture. William nodded seriously. In another corner, everyone had taken their positions and was ready. The curly-haired and blonde-haired individuals were also there to watch. Seeing Happy, Ellie happily waved to him, while Winnie's grandfather remarked that he looked wonderful. Elsewhere, the scene shifted to some bushes where Karina noted that the duel was about to begin. A tied-up, brown-haired man tried to ask about the other nobles, and his captor explained the situation. He informed him that they were in a shelter, feigning a kidnapping. Lucaston's subordinate looked toward the stage, asserting the focus was there rather than on the night squad. Meanwhile, at a quiet tower with a full view, a servant observed the scene and immediately reported to the prince that the match was about to start. He asked if the prince was ready, but suddenly his eyes widened in shock as he witnessed the high priest murdering the prince. Upon spotting him, the high priest threw a dagger and killed him instantly. Blood pooled on the floor of the room before the high priest finally made his exit. Returning to the scene, Karina recalled past events and teased Saga, noting that he had been tailing her since the time William was attacked by mercenaries. She then narrowed her eyes and scrutinized him, questioning why someone like him would have attacked her back at the farm. Suddenly remembering someone, Karina seriously asked if he had become a knight. Saga looked down at the crowd and explained that the man had been promoted through fraudulent merits, which was why the nobles dared to act that way. Hearing this, Karina gave a satisfied smile, remarking that it made sense since he wasn't that type of person. Saga then made a serious confession to her. He admitted that he honestly thought she would have killed William at that time, yet she had simply walked away. Intrigued, Karina asked why he had assumed such a thing. Saga thought for a moment before explaining that her previous actions had been quite ruthless. Furthermore, William hadn't just reported the incident, but had also accepted the reward. He argued that it was impossible to say he wasn't involved. His words left Karina in quiet contemplation as she softly remarked that it was simply her style, leaving Saga dazed. He didn't quite understand the girl before him, as Karina softly told him that it was her hobby, calling him a frightened dog. Her words left Saga lost in thought for a moment, wondering about her hobby. But as Karina prepared to depart, he questioned her since it was time to work. He asked where she was going since their mission was to guard the escape route. But his eyes widened as he saw Karina assassinating a man below, prompting him to leap from the tree and frantically ask if she had lost her mind. Karina carefully adjusted her mask and explained that she had to eliminate all the mercenaries hired by the nobles who were planning to cause a disturbance. Saga sternly reminded her that their objective was to assassinate the royals and warned her not to act on her own, but Karina bluntly cut him off. She told him he had no right to speak after trying to kill her, leaving Saga speechless, before she leaned in and whispered that failing to understand the target was his fault. Staring into his eyes, she coldly remarked that if the goal was truly to assassinate the royals, they would only need spies in the capital rather than scattering assassins everywhere. She questioned why they would strike in broad daylight across every location from dining halls to beggar-filled alleys if it were a simple assassination. She firmly stated that doing this in crowded areas meant it wasn't an assassination but a massacre, as a sudden realization flashed through her mind. They intended to kill as many people as possible in that brief window, but Saga sternly warned her when he felt she was overstepping. He told her not to speculate, but Karina mockingly replied that he seemed like a naive child who only knew how to obey his father's every whim. She then handed him a piece of paper she had stolen from his comrades, and after a moment, looked at Saga with a smile. She asked if his orders also mentioned a day of slaughter, and seeing Saga's immense shock, she teased him by suggesting that they probably didn't. She coldly turned to leave, reminding him that his father was likely deceiving him with the intention of seizing control of the entire kingdom. Saga's face darkened as he fell into thought, while Karina softly announced her departure before the scene shifted to her drawing her sword for action. Unaware of the danger, the group urged each other to hurry as things were about to begin, while Karina's expression grew grim as they continued their chatter. The brown-haired man nervously rambled about whether they only had to kill William, and if they would avoid prison while the lives of the nobles hung in the balance. He assured them that if they eliminated William and vanished, the rest would be handled, causing Karina to smile at the mention of William's name while the brown-haired man whistled. As they hurried along, the scene shifted to another corner where a man complained of a stomach ache and wondered if the food he ate was spoiled. The king looked around and noted that everyone was late, while a guard nearby gave instructions to his fellow soldier. He ordered his comrade to take the man to the portable restroom, leaving the suffering man to wonder if the chef had used rotten ingredients. He continued to groan about the pain and the distance of the toilets until the red-eyed man suggested that a secluded spot was more appropriate, which he agreed with. He agreed, but suddenly a figure appeared and strangled the brown-haired man until his face turned blue, while the red-eyed man remained oblivious to what had happened. A voice from the training grounds suddenly shouted for William to come down, claiming that exiled bandits had returned to seek their revenge. The group appeared and arrogantly announced that they had kidnapped all the nobles, demanding that William come down and face them in battle. They threatened the lives of the nobles, and a gray-haired man added that all the aristocrats were currently being held captive inside a cave. He claimed he had narrowly escaped to report the news, while another man shouted that these were merely insignificant remnants for Sir William to handle. He urged him to act like a hero, just as he did when he defeated 100 enemies, while William cast a worried glance toward the knight captain. A faint cry for help echoed near them as the brown-haired man mockingly feigned terror, acting as though he were absolutely petrified. Someone shouted at the stiff acting, and even those playing the enemies felt embarrassed by their performance, which was worse than trash, as they considered just killing everyone. This is bad, the knight captain thought to himself, realizing at a glance that this was a conspiracy by the nobility. Regardless, bringing real swords to cause trouble was clearly an attempt at murder, and the commoners below couldn't help but mutter about what was happening during the grand ceremony event. The knight captain warned William that he didn't need to go down, as His Majesty would handle it, just as the captain had predicted. With a darkened expression, the king roared, demanding to know who dared to pull such a prank, leaving the curly-haired group in a state of panic, while Karina let out a long, weary sigh. She had followed along for William's sake, but she finally made a decision regarding these fools, while the brown-haired man remained oblivious, wondering what was wrong. Karina then launched an attack right next to the brown-haired man, who was so terrified and stunned that he began to scream frantically. Untie me right now, you bastard, he yelled, but Karina merely tilted her head and pointed her blade at them, asking if they still thought this was a joke and telling the pigs to make their choice quickly. She demanded they call William down or face a massacre, while William stood still, observing their every move as the one with the smiling face grinned inanely, his thoughts a complete mystery. Karina gave a cold smile and remarked that the slaughter was about to begin anyway, so they might as well start early, a sentiment the red-eyed man quietly confirmed. It was exactly the chaos he had anticipated, and he ordered them to kill all the fugitives and ensure the royal family was eliminated before officially commencing the day of slaughter. Karina then faced William with a piercing gaze, and he stared back at her with an expressionless face as a sudden thought flashed through his mind. He had nightmares every night, often rushing out of bed to search the house, only for William to witness a horrific scene just moments later. The 3 heads she had severed turned out to be those of his loved ones from that nightmare, and he had looked at his family in utter shock at that moment. Karina coldly told him that to her, revenge meant wiping out an entire lineage, while he felt himself going mad every day because she remained free, waking up in terror each night to check on his relatives. Each time, he tried to focus on what he could do to become stronger, and even when his body felt like it was falling apart, he stubbornly persisted. "Happy, let's do it again," he said, returning to the present as William took a sword from the person beside him, and solemnly remarked how fortunate it was that she had come for him instead of his family. Seeing the situation, the knight captain urged the king to withdraw, but the king immediately shook his head in refusal, stating that someone would die even if he left. "As always, I am simply making a choice," he said with a smile, expressing his hope that it would prove to be the right one. The knight captain frowned as he looked at William, unable to fathom what he was thinking. But as he watched him step forward with such ease, a thought occurred to the captain. Could William have actually prepared for this battle? He had heard many rumors about the boy, suggesting that if one lived a lie, their true self would eventually be revealed. Back then, he had dismissed it as childish stubbornness, but now his opinion was changing. Now, however, that resilient stubbornness seemed like the most correct choice, while the blonde-haired man looked on in shock at the expression of the one with the smiling face standing beside him. Karina was bewildered by what was happening, but she suddenly stepped forward and sliced off a lock of the brown-haired man's hair before pointing her finger at William. She warned that with just one more step or action, she would behead all the captured nobles, causing the brown-haired man to scream in a total panic, begging to be released and for everything to be called off. However, he was immediately silenced by a punch to the face, leaving the brown-haired man in disbelief as the cloaked man coldly issued a warning. "Shut up, can't you see what's happening?" he hissed, leaning in close to the brown-haired man to whisper that their little play had now become a reality. The cloaked man glared at the brown-haired man and told him plainly that since their own lives were now at stake, they were going to kidnap them for real. The 3 nobles were left speechless by the sight, and the gray-haired man began discussing with those beside him how everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. His companion agreed that at this rate, he would surely be killed, prompting the gray-haired man to turn helplessly to the noble from before. "Hey, why did you hire actual exiled bandits?" he asked, but the man had no explanation, stammering that it was impossible and he had no idea. Breaking into a cold sweat, he wondered what on earth was happening, while a knight nearby instructed the others to follow him quietly so they could rescue the kidnapped nobles. They led the man in gray away, warning him not to make a sound, while the gray-haired man continued to wonder if this was truly the right course of action. The blonde man placed his hand on the masked man's shoulder and advised Happy that it would be best to stay out of the fight, warning him that if all the nobles were to die because of him, the weight of that responsibility would not rest solely on his shoulders, while William turned back and firmly assured Happy that he would win and not to worry. The masked man fell into deep thought for a moment upon seeing this, watching the boy's movements and thinking to himself that William's skills had indeed improved a great deal. Thinking of this, he felt that the boy could not even demonstrate half of his true ability here, as he noticed William's hands were trembling incessantly. This was his first life-and-death battle against an opponent who had already surpassed him, leaving him bound by fear as Karina let out a mocking sneer. "What is the matter? I remember my little puppy always wagging his tail and trembling," she said, beginning to further ridicule William. "Don't you think you've gone a bit too far playing the hero?" she asked, provoking him to shout back in a rage. "Shut up. I will finish you right here and now." Karina chuckled with feigned surprise at his words, remarking that she had to admit the Night Order certainly knew how to train a stray dog. "How impressive," she said before raising her sword and adding, "Fine then, I shall play with you for a while," as William quickly lunged forward to attack. Karina remained perfectly calm as she observed his every move while William launched a relentless assault, though she did nothing but maintain her defense. He then swung his blade to attack her lower body, but Karina seized the opening to deliver a kick that sent William reeling backward, his head spinning. However, he quickly regained his composure and charged toward Karina, and it was only now that the two of them truly began their head-to-head confrontation. Turning pale, William tried to think calmly, realizing his first strike was blocked, and he needed to devise a second one to counter. But Karina teased him as if reading his mind. He hurriedly took a defensive stance to block her strike, but Karina softly warned William to dodge, leaving him bewildered and unable to understand her meaning. Immediately after, Karina launched a surprise attack, and as she withdrew her sword, she gently told the stunned boy that he would have been dead if she hadn't warned him. "I do not wish to kill you," she said as William looked up at her with eyes full of resentment, while the masked man watched their duel intently as their blades clashed. William gritted his teeth as he struggled against Karina's attack, while she wore a look of pure amusement and a disdainful smile. He then attempted to swing his sword in a counterattack, but in that moment, William gazed at his current situation in a daze before staring up at the sky. His eyes were completely devoid of hope as he suddenly realized his techniques were useless and that she would kill him, while Karina casually brushed her hair and spoke softly. "My little puppy, in the end, you are still just a frightened whelp," she said, approaching William as he remained standing there, completely motionless. Karina swung her blade while offering a word of reassurance that she would not kill him, as the blonde man nearby urged him to fight back. Just as he called for a counterattack, the masked man beside him had already lunged forward unnoticed, while Karina looked sternly at William and softly commanded him to strike. The masked man wore a bizarre grin as he charged toward the spectator stands, just as William's mask of fear fell away to reveal his determined gaze. William swiftly attacked Karina, catching her completely by surprise and knocking her backward, before he declared with a grim expression that even his fear had been calculated in advance, leaving Karina collapsed on the ground with her hands covered in blood following his assault. The crowd of people loudly chanted his name, "William, William, William," while Karina was left utterly confused as to how this could have happened. She wondered in confusion if someone who was just trembling with fear could truly dare to attack her, realizing he was prepared to sacrifice himself as she muttered about the past. "I have seen countless battles where people were overconfident in their strength and looked down on their opponents," she said, as William replied with a resolute gaze, stating that he knew exactly what opportunities could arise in such fights, while the masked man approached and stared intently at him. Karina looked up at the sky and groaned that her head was spinning, while the cloaked figures nearby began to shout in an uproar, "Damn it! What on earth is this?" The brown-haired man struggled and screamed for release, while the cloaked man explained they weren't mere exiles, but were acting on the nobility's orders. Terrified, the nobles barked at the king to execute them immediately, claiming honor meant nothing to such men and pointing out their failure. Having lost the fight and failed their word, the cloaked man furiously retorted, calling them bastards and reminding them of their agreement. He shouted that the noble himself had ordered William's elimination, never expecting the situation to spiral so far out of control. The noble snarled that it was all a deceptive trap and lies, while the brown-haired man wept as the two sides continued their heated argument. The king looked down upon the chaos and asked what was happening, to which the knight captain respectfully replied that something was gravely amiss. Reporting that the prince, princess, dukes, and queen had all failed to return, the king gasped in horror, fearing the worst had happened. The captain frantically demanded the location of the troops and their commander, prompting a knight to quickly step forward with a report. He explained the commander had led the men to find the kidnapped nobles, causing the captain to urgently order their immediate recall. Sensing an impending disaster, the captain sent the knight away just as a white pigeon flew past the stands and into the distance. The bird spotted a lone figure staggering through a rocky cave, where a knight named Hector was checking on his superior. Hector asked if the commander was all right as a silhouette approached, but his curiosity turned to shock upon seeing the figure clearly. The knight stood dazed, seeing only a single survivor, and rushed toward the commander to ask what had transpired in that place. The commander somberly explained that the exiled bandits were not the cause, but rather that someone else had orchestrated the entire plot. Looking around at the carnage, the knight wondered how so many soldiers could have been slaughtered and where the killers had vanished to. The commander noted they had all fled, and when the knight asked if everyone was gone, he insisted there was no time left for talk. They needed to return and warn the others of the danger. While elsewhere, Karina looked up at William and called his name. She gently warned him that true peril was much closer than he imagined, and soon, this entire place would be devoid of life. William looked at her in confusion as Karina, drenched in sweat from the pain, confessed she had tried to save him because she liked him. When William asked if there were others, Karina smiled faintly and confirmed that the exiled bandits had surely been wiped out. She pointed out that he had destroyed the arena and driven off the exiles, but a phantom had appeared in their wake. This new presence made the previous chaos seem insignificant, leaving William to question the true meaning behind her cryptic words. Karina coldly announced that a bloody massacre had begun, just as the knight captain asked a nearby soldier about the commander. At that moment, the soldier suddenly lunged at the captain, while Karina continued her grim prophecy that the king would soon perish. Despite losing both hands to protect his sovereign, the captain fought on as Karina sneered that everyone else would soon follow him in death. William stared at the unfolding horror while the masked man remained oblivious, and the panicked citizens below erupted into a frenzy. Amidst the deafening noise, a man shouted for weapons to be brought out, only to be caught off guard by a sudden, violent assault. As the crowd screamed for help, Finn watched in wide-eyed terror as the people around him were systematically slaughtered. A white-haired man called out to Finn, telling him to stay alert and watch everyone closely because a traitor was hidden among them. A desperate citizen begged a knight for salvation, and the soldier urged them to run quickly in his direction. Seconds later, that man killed the knight who had guided him, then looked up frantically and declared the dawn of a new era. Nearby, the masked man watched the tragedy unfold until his attention was drawn to Winnie and her family fighting off several wicked men. He rushed to their aid while Karina lay on the ground, urging William to flee as a cloaked man approached a terrified Ellie. The masked man appeared and delivered a thunderous blow, but he suddenly turned back in alarm to face a new attack. Winnie lunged forward to shield him regardless of her own safety, but William appeared and killed the assailant before he could reach her. Once Winnie's family was safe, the knight captain carried the king on his back, pleading for his majesty to remain conscious. Suddenly, a chain appeared and ensnared the knight captain's arm, binding him so tightly that he could not break free. This left the captain bewildered, as the red-eyed man from before was the one who had stopped him and made a cold declaration. He told the captain to accept the kingdom's fall, but the captain simply turned away and gazed at the burning buildings in the distance. Seeing the smoke and the assassins behind him, the captain charged into the fray, finally realizing the true scale of the situation. This was no simple group of assassins, and he wondered how so many traitors could have infiltrated the kingdom undetected. The red-eyed man boldly claimed they were united by fate, asserting that they had always worshipped their master regardless of their lives. Even the man on the ground added that they awaited the day their master would arrive and drench the earth in blood. The king stared intently at the fallen man, and seeing the captain's confusion, he began to offer a careful explanation. He revealed that they were a religious cult from the war era, established long before you were known as a knight. They followed a demonic entity from the war, believing it would end all conflict and establish a new world order. They saw its immense power as God's will, and as empires fell, the survivors united to prepare for the demon's arrival. However, the demon vanished, and the king admitted he thought the knight, now an exiled bandit, had been defeated by it. The captain asked if the king had disbelieved the legend, but the king shook his head, saying he knew the truth once he heard the news. He was certain it was the devil after a whole squad was killed by one man, so he sent the survivor into exile to hide the scent of blood. Because the knight wanted to keep fighting, the king turned him into a liar, a deed he now recalled with a darkened face and deep regret. He explained that the devil's existence was a taboo known only to kings and popes, making the cover-up easy but terrible. He frowned and continued, stating he had to act because the kingdom would face destruction if that demon ever returned. Even after the war, he reinforced the walls and executed anyone suspected of having ties to the demonic entity. He spoke sorrowfully of how he had once taken great pride in his kingdom, being the safest territory in the land. Yet that safety made them a target for cults, who chose his kingdom as a sacrifice to summon the devil using seeds planted during the peace. Saga listened with a heavy heart, realizing the king rumored to be going mad was actually a man who had only ever sought peace. He looked toward the enemy and realized that his own side, the devil worshippers, were the ones who were truly evil. Looking up at the sky, he thought about the judgments and salvations he had carried out, believing they were divine commands. He reflected on everything he had once considered to be righteous punishment. Saga finally realized that every action had been employed to summon that vanished demon. Was it truly so powerful that it nearly rivaled God? Reflecting on past events, he wondered if his father had been concealing this entire truth all along, just as the red-eyed man suddenly turned to remind him. Saga, go to the castle now, for the high priest is waiting, he said, before bluntly stating that the man wanted him to witness this moment. He wanted him to accept their existence and urged him to leave, promising they would eliminate the remaining survivors before following after him. Saga silently glanced away with unreadable thoughts, while the king looked up with an expression brimming with both sadness and remorse. Seeing this, he immediately lowered his head with a pensive gaze, and then he trudged toward that place to meet the high priest, his steps heavy and uncertain while a brutal massacre unfolded behind him. Suddenly, Winnie's image flashed through his mind, bringing him supplies, which caused him to halt his steps in an instant. Memories of the old gravedigger also surfaced, reminding him of the reward for his hard work that would protect him from the corpses. Saga stepped over a human skull but continued forward, feeling as though he were traversing a path littered with the dead. He gripped the item the old gravedigger had given him as the high priest's voice echoed in his ears, declaring this mission his initiation rite. Restrain your emotions and accept everything as a gloomy atmosphere shrouded the tower, while a figure quietly opened the door and stepped inside. Upon seeing him enter, the high priest spoke, saying he had been waiting, while Saga silently bowed his head and gently closed the door. Unable to look directly at the high priest, he simply asked if this was the plan for a true world his father had spoken of since his youth. He descended slowly and confirmed that his eventual acceptance and joining of their ranks was inevitable. It was indeed predestined, and those words confirmed Saga's suspicions as he softly whispered the word, "We." He then looked at the high priest anxiously and asked if they were devil worshippers, to which the man bluntly replied yes, asking how he felt after facing the truth. Hearing that, Saga shut his eyes tightly and said sorrowfully that he did not dare to look, before slowly beginning to share his thoughts. He remarked that his father would surely achieve his goal, as even he, an apostle, had not realized the followers possessed such immense power. The high priest patted his shoulder in comfort, stating there was more to come and they must prepare for a new world, though he wondered why the boy was trembling. Since everything was over, he asked why the boy was so afraid, leading Saga to close his eyes and explain what lay behind that door. The corpses were screaming and pounding on the door as if to break it down, and he could feel them trying to burst through to the inside. The high priest frowned in thought before staring directly at the door in silence, remaining completely speechless for a moment. He stared at Saga, who tremblingly claimed the talisman was holding back the dead, but the man quickly reassured him that no corpses existed. He ordered Saga to destroy it, but the trembling youth stubbornly refused, fearing the corpses would drag them away, leading the high priest to make a judgment. Claiming Saga had not yet escaped his weakness, and that it was merely a fear-induced hallucination, he snatched the item from around the boy's neck. He threw it to the ground and crushed it underfoot before telling Saga to look at the door again, asserting that only silence remained for the dead. Saga obeyed and turned his head to stare at the door, where he saw a black liquid seeping in just as the entrance seemed to burst open. A gruesome horde of corpses swarmed inside, causing Saga to shake violently and cry out as the dead rushed directly toward the two of them. Sensing something, the high priest hurriedly covered his face in confusion over the situation before staring intently at the person who had just entered. There stood Smiley, gripping a chain and exuding a dangerous aura as he looked at the high priest, leaving Saga in utter shock and disbelief. Even the high priest felt a sense of bewilderment as Smiley calmly spoke, stating that he had grown weary of seeing people perish. He explained that he did not want to become a monster, and thus fought in a way that avoided killing, which caused Saga's eyes to flicker with emotion. He recalled the scenes he had witnessed in the Zikong arena, where the fallen bodies bore no blade wounds, but instead showed heavy bruising on their wrists and shoulders. He had been unable to fathom the enemy's purpose for fighting that way, even during the battle where the exile bandits were wiped out. No one had died in that incident, as if it were all calculated to spare them. Yet Saga remained confused by his father's words and Smiley's true intentions in a lethal struggle. "Why do I sense those words in your eyes?" he repeated once more. "I do not want to become a monster." Saga's eyes filled with even more shock than before as Smiling Face suddenly shouted, "But you all came and slaughtered everyone." His face grew more horrific as he spoke. "Because you aren't human but demons." Saga couldn't believe his ears. Had they really killed everyone? With so many followers blending into the arena and the forest path to the kingdom, could there really have been no armed believers? "I clearly walked here right after the chaos, and he arrived shortly after, meaning he followed at my walking pace, but how?" Regaining his composure, the high priest drew his sword and spoke with disdain. "Did those countless battles fail to hinder your progress? How boastful do you think I'll fall for such lies?" Hearing this, Smiling Face grew more manic, his face twisting into a crazed, excited grin. Gripping the chain tightly, Smiling Face began to whirl the weapon, its speed increasing as he spun it before the high priest in provocation. Nevertheless, he maintained a calm expression and told him, "You arrogantly stole our weapon." But the boy ignored his words. Smiling Face suddenly attacked, and the high priest looked at the flying iron weight with contempt, noting it was their most rigorously trained weapon. He easily blocked the chain with his small sword, calling it a foolish choice before parrying it away, leaving Smiling Face slightly surprised as the high priest prepared to counter. He pulled a sharp dagger from his pocket and threw it accurately at the boy, but he had underestimated the strength of Smiling Face. He used the gaps in the chain to stop the dagger, and while the high priest was distracted, launched another heavy strike with the chain. A moment of inattention sent him flying backward, while Saga dodged in time to avoid injury, allowing Smiling Face to seize the chance and charge. He swung the chain at the high priest again while reaching into his pocket, maintaining a gentle smile as he threw something. It was the very dagger the man had thrown at him, now hurtling back toward its owner until a slashing sound preceded a spray of blood from the high priest's face. The dagger left a long gash across his face before hitting the ground, as Smiling Face quickly retracted his chain, his smiling expression never wavering. Now agitated, The high priest found the boy's proficiency absurd and couldn't help but ask how he could use their weapons so skillfully. "Who exactly are you?" But Smiling Face had no intention of answering, stating that words changed nothing and telling him to fight. Suddenly, his face distorted into that of an old man like a blurry hallucination. Yet the high priest recognized the strange transformation and furrowed his brows. Within the vision, he recalled a past encounter with someone he revered, remembering his vow to follow and serve that person. Smiling Face's visage grew even more bizarre, appearing to hold two different expressions at once, leaving the high priest completely stunned. He stared at the boy unconsciously, experiencing the same overwhelming awe, reverence, and terror as his first contact with a deity. Why was this feeling, the very thing he had worshipped and waited for so long, appearing now? No, it couldn't be possible. Perhaps he had waited too long and grown weak from a lack of worthy opponents, for he suddenly knelt and raised his hands in prayer. As he worshipped with flesh and blood, Smiling Face seized the moment to wrap the chain around his waist, but the man quickly snapped back and gripped the chain tightly. The high priest pulled the chain and stepped back, a sudden move that confused Smiling Face before the man spoke coldly. "From the first strike, I couldn't understand what you intended by tethering a great beast to yourself. Instead, you're the one being tossed around," he said, leaving Smiling Face wide-eyed with shock. The high priest tried to exploit a lapse in attention to stab him, but he fortunately dodged in time, leaning back to attack with a knife that the man easily parried. Neither side yielded as the sound of clashing blades echoed through the room without end, with each alternating between offense and defense. The sect leader focused his strength and lunged at Smiley Face, but he easily parried the strike with his small dagger as the sect leader increased his speed to force him to reveal a weakness. Unfortunately, he easily deflected every attack until they finally came to a halt with their weapons crossed, though the tide of the battle had shifted in a way that Smiley Face noticed immediately. He had drawn closer, and I wondered if he had wrapped another layer of chains around himself during the fight, as a sense of dread began to take hold of me. With every change in the situation, every swap of weaponry, and every time our eyes met, why did I feel as though I were fighting entirely different entities? Saga watched the duel from the sidelines with growing turmoil, noticing that the man's breathing, posture, gaze, and aura all seemed to take on different forms. These were not traits that could belong to a single person, leading him to shout that corpses were manifesting. But the sect leader immediately dismissed his claim and refused to believe him. The sect leader told Saga there were no corpses, while Smiley Face gave a sinister grin at their bickering and remarked that just as gods exist for those who believe in them, so too will corpses appear for those who believe in them, leaving Saga frozen in confusion as Smiley Face continued to speak. "I remember every opponent through our battles, as it is the only way I can understand people in the arena, and those memories haunt my mind every day without end. Even those I have killed return in my dreams to continue an endless war, and I feel those battles squirming through my body, ensuring I never forget a single moment, and that includes you. You are now bound together with us as well."